The Rose School of Thought demigod, who was hiding in the shadows, wore a hooded black robe and a golden mask with red and black patterns smeared across it. His figure couldn't be made out, but he was definitely not short, standing at a height of 1.8 meters. He used the Marauder Pathways sealed artifact to steal Tutmosis' sarcophagus, placing it before him. Immediately, his body phased away and drew out an extended form as though he had turned into a thick, long, and soft rope. This transparent and nearly ethereal rope quickly bound the heavy sarcophagus in a bid to bring it into the spirit world. At this moment, a strong gust of wind sounded in the Rose School of Thought demigod's ears. They clashed in the air, forming an explosive-like stir. Boom! Tutmosis' golden sarcophagus was sent flying as the transparent rope around it unfurled, shrinking back into a humanoid form. This Rose School of Thought demigod floated diagonally downwards in an uncontrollable manner before turning into a wraith, no, an evil spirit's form. He allowed the intense winds to blow through his body without making any additional movements. He saw eddies in the air swirl up rapidly as an unrestrained hurricane suddenly appeared, sweeping up the rocks, gravel, trash, and parts of the harbor's roof into the air. Even the carriage which had been autonomously moving before flew up because of its proximity. It was torn into pieces amidst the strong winds. Seemingly lucky, but in fact an expected outcome, the shadows where the Rose School of Thought demigod was hiding didn't have any lone soldiers and was far from the main path. The lady in the black evening gown and crown of thorns was obstructed by the hurricane as her body involuntarily wavered backward. She was unable to immediately rush to the golden sarcophagus that had been thrown up into the air, and she could only use her momentum to turn her body sideways, casting her gaze to a warehouse that stood far away outside the dock district. Immediately after that, she turned her head to look at the Rose School of Thought demigod because he wasn't affected by the hurricane. Confinement. The lady, who was also wearing a golden mask, raised her left hand and grabbed at her enemy's figure within her sights. The Rose School of Thought demigod had formidable spiritual intuition. As he sensed the danger with the help of his spiritual intuition, he did a mirror blink ahead of time, leaping onto a piece of glass about 80 meters away. At this moment, the hurricane seemed to stabilize itself and rapidly calmed down. Pa! 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 The items that had been swept up fell to the ground, including the golden sarcophagus that contained Tutmosis II. Bang! It slammed open a crater as it completely broke apart after suffering the wrath of the hurricane. The lid at the top flew up, scattering the golden gems that were sealed in the top 2 layers of the sarcophagus as burial items. Then, the lower level of the sarcophagus tumbled a few times, dropping golden boxes and jade containers that stored the desiccated organs. A corpse that was bound in yellowish-brown cloth tumbled out. Its surface was covered in a dark red, oily liquid. This was none other than the mummy created after Tutmosis II passed away. It was extremely thin, and its face had a golden mask with patterns covering it just like the mask worn by the demigod from the Rose School of Thought. Embedded in its eye sockets were 2 abnormally pure onyx gems. The moment the mummy appeared, the surroundings seemed to dim. The sarcophagus's main body stopped as dark red liquid flowed out of it, soaking the nearby soil. When the Rose School of Thought demigod with the Marauder Pathways sealed artifact saw this scene, he was first enraged before he thought of something. The look in his eyes turned into pleasant surprise. His figure vanished from the glass fragment, phasing into the 2 onyx eyeballs of Tutmosis II. Then, he possessed the mummy and attempted to pull it into the spirit world. Suddenly, he sensed that the mummy in his evil spirit vision had vanished. Simultaneously, the Tutmosis II mummy with a slanted golden crown on its head suddenly bounced up, turning its onyx-embedded face towards the only lighthouse in Pritz Harbor. This pharaoh, which had been dead for centuries, produced an inhuman cry from its throat. Bound with yellowish-brown bandages, it freed its shriveled leg, strode and ran off. It seemed to be running towards freedom, but it had forgotten one thing. It was just a corpse. It should be lying down in silence. Tap. 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 The Tutmosis II mummy finished accelerating just as it began. Upon seeing this, the lady with the crown of thorns raised her right palm and aimed at the mutated mummy. All the dead will receive their eternal peace, she said a few words in ancient Hermes. Bang! The Tutansis II mummy exerted strength in its legs as it leaped up, jumping into another direction, escaping the region that would make it enjoy its eternal rest, doing so in a way that didn't adhere to a zombie's agility. Further away, the black-haired, golden-eyed man, who was pursuing Mamosi, narrowed his eyes as his ring once again emitted a crystalline beam of light. His figure teleported in front of the mummy as he attempted to stop the deceased from moving away. However, Tutansis II changed directions once again, charging out from a different angle. It kept changing its direction, as though its goal was to approach the lighthouse by following an irregular route. Mamosi's heart stirred as his body suddenly vanished, flashing onto a piece of glass not far from the mummy. He used this as a springboard and finally appeared in the two onyx and Tutansis II eye sockets. Although the lone military's demigod had restricted possession, the Highlands Kingdom's pharaoh was no ordinary item. It had some spirituality remaining. Seeing his partner succeed, the demigod with the Marauder Pathway sealed artifact didn't hesitate to extend his black-gloved left hand, aimed it at the lady in the evening gown, and gripped his hand into a fist before turning it half a circle. The lady immediately felt her thoughts go adrift for a second. Following that, she was bound tightly by her own gown. Almost at the same time, the lone soldier far away on the warehouse rooftops found it difficult to control their rifles as they aimed in her direction and pulled their triggers. Bam! 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 The steel monsters with thick cannons also unleashed their cannonballs at the lady. The golden-eyed demigod didn't attempt to save his partner. Instead, he looked at Tutansis II's mummy, which had come to a stop because of Mamosi's possession. He gripped his right hand into a fist and waved it abruptly. Execution! A look of joy flashed past his eyes because it didn't matter if the mummy died again, but Mamosi couldn't afford that. Elsewhere, just as the bullets and cannonballs were to hit the lady, they suddenly slowed down as though they had sunken into a quagmire formed of air. They were repelled by a power that stemmed from laws. On the lady's head, the crown of thorns lit up suddenly, using up more than half of the accumulated ocean of light. The hooded Rose School of Thought demigod immediately discovered this as he vanished from a location far away from it, as though he was fundamentally wiped away. This also meant that he had arrived in front of the lady and saw her raise her right hand. Gathered within her right hand was pure condensed light. They transformed into a blazing spear that had two pure white wings sweep out at its tip, enveloping the spearhead like an angel's embrace. The Rose School of Thought demigod's eyes widened immediately as he heard the footsteps of death. He attempted to use mirror blink to leap away, but he found that his surroundings were sealed by the pure white wings. An intense sense of fear surged within him and inundated his reason, making him abandon his resistance towards his roots to his being and strength. At this moment, a shrieking wail sounded as the lady's eyes temporarily turned turbid. The blazing spear in her right hand deviated to the side as she failed to maintain its stability. It collapsed into a gorgeous blast of light as it was swept up in the air like a hurricane. And in the vicinity of the Tutansis II mummy, Mamosi had stopped his possession. Beside him, a dirty doll fell to the ground. The doll's chest had a tear that nearly penetrated it. It stood up and its eyeless face seemed to come to life, turning abnormally warped and gruesome. It continuously wailed with a shrieking tone, causing the nearby lone golden-eyed demigod to feel an invisible hand grabbing at his neck as he kicked and struggled in midair. It was because of this doll's existence that Mamosi wasn't executed. Likewise, the other Rose School of Thought demigod wasn't struck by the blazing spear. When the latter saw this, he immediately used mirror blink to approach the Tutansis II mummy that was still focused on moving in the direction of the lighthouse. He planned on using this opportunity to join forces with Mamosi to achieve the goal of their operation. At this moment, the lady in the evening gown erased the distance, appearing directly above them. The crown of thorns on her head emitted the purest of light. She pressed down with her right hand and said, "This place will have the mysterious weakened and the real strengthened." Just as she said that, the blood-stained doll immediately lost its expression and stopped shrieking. The golden-eyed demigod from the lone military finally had a chance to catch a breather. He forcefully pulled away the hexed hand that was grappling his throat. From that moment, their demigod powers rapidly declined as attacks that stemmed from reality were rapidly boosted. This also meant that the lone soldiers at the top of the warehouse and the steam chariot that was slowly approaching on its treads were the victors in this battle. To the lone army, this was a situation where their advantage was extremely amplified. Momosi and the other Rose school of thought demigod immediately reacted. One of them tried to possess the mummy, while the other attempted to pick up the eyeless doll. They planned on escaping before their strength decreased to a certain threshold. Of course, the lady with the evening gown and the golden-eyed demigod couldn't allow the enemy to do as they wished, but just as they were about to take action, a light streaked into the sky and exploded into dreamy fireworks. Right on the heels of that, the two demigods felt their spiritual perception trigger simultaneously as they looked into opposite directions. A hand wearing a transparent glove reached out from the void beside Tutmosis II's golden sarcophagus, grabbing a handful of soil that was soaked with dark red liquid. The liquid was a mixture of Tutmosis II's brain matter and bodily fluids. It was a ritualistic material used to maintain its spirituality, and the latter contained its blood. Momosi and the Rose school of thought demigod, who wielded the sealed artifact, also looked over, and they happened to see a figure wearing a formal suit and top hat appear. This figure was bending his back to pick up the soil soaked with dark red liquid. During this process, he kept his right hand to his left breast, as though he was bowing towards the demigods. Then, maintaining this pose, he looked up to reveal his metal-gray masked face before rapidly fading away into nothingness. Carrying the iron cigar case in hand while passing through walls to leave the warehouse that she was hiding in, Sharon strictly followed Sherlock Moriarty's arrangements, using her state as a wraith to fly to the tallest building in Pritz Harbor, the lighthouse. Right on the heels of that, she silently counted down. 3, 2, 1. Before she could gather her thoughts, Sharon's ear resonated with an intense boom. The harbor in the distance seemed to be swept by a terrifying hurricane. She held the iron cigar case in her left hand as her nails suddenly grew sharp before stabbing into the wall of spirituality, completely destroying the invisible isolation with an attack filled with a wraith's spirituality. A sudden gust of wind gushed outwards in every direction as Sharon suddenly felt her spirit body become augmented. And this stemmed from the item stored inside the iron cigar case. She wasn't affected by her curiosity, accustomed to restraining her emotions as she continued approaching the lighthouse at high speeds. During this entire process, she kept maintaining an irregular trajectory, occasionally lunging forward to the left or drifting upwards to the right. At times, she would rely on mirror blink to leap onto a different trajectory before continuing her approach to the target. This made it seem like she was dodging an invisible and terrifying enemy, but Sharon knew very well that nothing was chasing her, nor was she locked on by a distant attack. She felt as though she was performing in a one-man show without any opponents. However, she didn't have any doubts, nor did she waste any time to observe or wait. She pretended that within the air in her surroundings was the silent one Momosi and the lone military's demigods, doing her best to dodge and slip past them. As her flight continued, Sharon's blue eyes, which were peeled towards the air, had a red stream of light reflected in them. It flew from above, suddenly blasting apart, turning into beautiful fireworks that was a mix of red, orange, and yellow. Sharon immediately retracted her gaze. As she used her wraith fingernails to spew spirituality and reform the wall of isolation, she leaped towards the path Merrick had laid. There were shattered mirrors placed at fixed distances in a periodic manner. With her dainty bonnet and black dress, her figure kept flashing to them, and soon, she appeared inside Merrick's brown eyes. She then lightly took a stride out, the iron cigar case in her hand already encased with a wall of spirituality. Merrick and Sharon didn't converse, nor did they exchange looks with their eyes. As though they were being pursued by an invisible monster, they didn't dare stay put. Frankly speaking, they had a general idea about the role that each of their actions played. After all, Sherlock Moriarty had once attracted zombies and shadows with a copper whistle. As for Sharon's mirror blink, the two of them knew its traits well. However, they couldn't imagine how everything would develop. They had no idea how the detective with many secrets would be able to steal the Tutmosis II mummy under the watch of a few demigods. It wasn't a situation where the mummy could run if it wanted. the demigods were bound to stop it. At this moment, they saw a figure materialize. He wore a black formal suit and a half-top hat. His face was covered with an iron-gray mask, and in his hand was a handful of dark red soil and a dark brown book. It was none other than Sherlock Moriarty. Merrick immediately slowed down his pace. As he allowed the detective to smear the soil onto the book before pocketing it and grabbing his shoulder, he surveyed his surroundings. However, he didn't discover the existence of the Tuttensis II mummy. Did it ultimately fail? Having been mentally prepared for failure, he sighed as he watched himself, Sharon, and Sherlock Moriarty fade away and vanish from the spot. In the region where the demigods were fighting, the golden-eyed lone military demigod had an ominous feeling when he saw the gray-masked man bow before teleporting away. He felt that things had taken a drastic turn for the worse, into a terrible, unpredictable outcome. He needs to be stopped. Although I don't know what he did, he needs to be stopped. Such a thought instantly surfaced in his mind as the golden-eyed demigod immediately activated his ring. He used traveling against traveling, teleporting to pursue teleporting. However, in this short span of time, he realized that he was unable to lock onto the mysterious person's aura. In other words, he had either created an interference at the demigod level, or he had teleported somewhere very, very far away. Regardless of which possibility it was, it meant that any pursuit attempt would easily face failure. And more importantly, if he were to leaving the lady to fend against Momosi and the other Rose School of Thought demigod alone, that would be an extremely dangerous situation. After all, the mysterious power in the area had not weakened to the point where real firearms could pose a threat to their suppressed selves. Besides, there haven't been any losses yet. The mummy is still around, with the person only taking away some soil rich in spirituality. The golden-eyed demigod swept his gaze at the Tuttensis II mummy who was standing blankly in its spot, before casting his gaze back on Momosi. Suddenly, the mummy wrapped in yellowish-brown bandages that were soaked in dark red liquid had vanished from the four demigods' spiritual perception. The mummy had vanished without any warning. For a second, Momosi and the other demigods felt as though they had watched an interesting magic show or a play with a mischievous element in it. But sadly, as demigods, they couldn't tell how it was done. Moments later, having lost their target, Momosi and the other Rose School of Thought demigod didn't hesitate to make their figures fade away in a bid to escape via the spirit world. The golden-eyed demigod and lady tried hard to stop them. After 2 teleports, Klein returned to a 2-bedroom apartment in Backland which they had rented ahead of time with Sharon and Merrick. "I will pay you based on what we agreed upon," Sharon said just as she found her footing. At the same time, she returned Sherlock Moriarty the iron cigar case. They had previously agreed that regardless of the outcome, Sharon would provide him with the information regarding spirit world plunderers. If they succeeded, she would pay another 3,500 lone gold coins or £5,000. Klein received the iron cigar case which had corrosive signs on its surface. As he held it in his hand, he sensed Azek's copper whistle lightly jumping inside. He quickly put it away and gave Sharon and Merrick a smile. "Might I trouble you to wait outside? Give me 5 minutes." His tone is very firm. It's as if he has succeeded. What can he do in 5 minutes? It's impossible for him to teleport again and bring back the Tuttensis II mummy. This will be more dangerous and more difficult than before. Merrick was filled with puzzlement as his footsteps moved at an obviously slow pace. As for Sharon, she had floated to the wooden door which separated the rooms and passed through it. Merrick quickly reined in his thoughts and followed closely behind by walking out the door. Klein maintained a smile as he watched them. Then, he teleported to another cheap motel in East Borough. He had disguised himself to rent this room in the afternoon. Right on the heels of that, he took out the book with the dark brown cover which was stained with dark red mud stains. It was Grozel's Travels. As long as the blood still had remnant spirituality and hadn't coagulated, smearing it across the cover would allow the target to be pulled into the book world. And inside the Tuttensis II mummy's golden sarcophagus contained such blood. It also meant that, at this moment in time, the mummy was already in Klein's hands, inside Grozel's Travels. After hearing Merrick describe the procedure to making a pharaoh mummy, Klein had roughly come up with a plan. It was to use the corpse's attraction to Azek's copper whistle as spirit body threads. He then controlled the mummy and used this marionette to lead the demigods away from the vicinity of the sarcophagus. He did this so that he could teleport over to retrieve the blood and create the necessary conditions. He had never thought of directly taking the mummy away or getting it to run out of the harbor successfully. It wasn't pragmatic to think that, as it would involve directly facing the attacks from the demigods. And even if he, Merrick, and Sharon were together, it was still beyond their capabilities. It might not even work even if he spent a large sum of money to summon Miss Messenger Rionette Tinker. Therefore, despite Azek's copper whistle and the mummy's reanimation appearing to be the goal and plan, it was in fact simply a method to manipulate and misdirect. This allowed the other actors to ignore the situation of the golden sarcophagus. This was a plot that even demigods couldn't fend off. This was because they were protecting the mummy and not the sarcophagus. They were targeting the high-sequence Beyonders from the Rose School of Thought, and not three people who were loitering around in the distance with unknown goals. Klein's plan wasn't a plan that was highly interdependent. It was amazingly light and lean while still allowing the plan to be carried out even if there was a tiny accident. He had very few parameters he needed to take into account. As long as the hurricane successfully toppled the sarcophagus, as long as Sharon followed his instructions and moved in an irregular trajectory, and as long as the military didn't have the manpower to easily finish off the Rose School of Thought demigods, all he needed was to wait for an opportunity to appear. After the demigods left the vicinity of the sarcophagus and that the mummy wasn't possessed by the evil spirit, all he needed to do was teleport over and retrieve something that was soaked in the liquid before escaping. This didn't need him to worry about the exact developments of the demigod battle. He didn't care who gained the upper hand or was injured. He also didn't need the Tutansis II mummy to run a certain distance to consider it a victory. As long as it started moving and became difficult to be caught, there wasn't any problem. Towards the end, his bow was partly to make it easy to scoop up the soil as a curtain call, and also partly to press Grozel's travels to his chest. If any accidents happened, he could immediately pull it out and use it as a shield. It was precisely because of this that Klein could smear the blood-soaked soil across the cover just as he teleported. Everything ran as expected. The directing was quite a success. As Klein reflected over the matter, he felt his potion's digestion accelerate. He didn't delay as he quickly set up a ritual. He sacrificed Grozel's travels above the grey fog, and then in his spirit body state, he brought Creeping Hunger, Azek's copper whistle, the Soul Assure's Beyonder characteristic, and Sharon's anti-hex golden bead into the book world. In the book world, just as Klein appeared in the city outskirts, he immediately took out remnant parts of the dark red soil and picked up a withered branch. Using raw divination, he found the Tutansis II mummy. He was worried that this manifestation of hexes would harm the residents here. Although the book world didn't have any lack of sequence 5 Beyonders, and the Tutansis II mummy remained in a muddled state having lost the stimulus from Azek's copper whistle, it was still a demigod when it was alive. The hexes that its corpse produced after his death were bound to be extraordinary. Even Klein himself didn't dare approach it if not for the anti-hex golden bead that Sharon had given him. Of course, Klein had also weighed the consequences before deciding on using Grozel's travels to steal the mummy. His previous experiences and the encounters of others had proven one thing: outsiders would not directly appear before the natives when they entered the book world. It required exploration before any contact was made. This was especially so for the first time. Therefore, Klein believed that the mummy was likely left somewhere uninhabited. And with this zombie's condition, it was likely to be engaging in a random walk. It would be difficult for it to explore in different directions autonomously like humans, elves, or giants. This also meant that, as long as he didn't drag it out, it wasn't likely for there to be any losses. Furthermore, it had only been about 3 minutes since Klein smeared the blood-soaked soil across the book's cover. Following the direction led by raw divination, Klein flew towards a nearby mountain peak. Soon, he came to a valley. At this moment, the Tutansis II mummy wrapped in yellowish-brown bandages and was dyed red from liquids had appeared. It was still wearing the golden mask with patterns across it. Its throat was letting out an inhuman sound as it rushed over with wide strides. The surroundings turned gloomy. At the same time, many incomplete animal carcasses tore away the soil covering them in the valley as they staggered towards Klein. Having his spirit body augmented by Azek's copper whistle, Klein immediately chuckled. What a warm welcome. He unhurriedly threw away the branch and raised a blob of black matter. This was a Soul Assure's Beyonder characteristic which he had released from the mutated version of Creeping Hunger. At its core was pure shimmering light that looked like a night sky embedded with stars. Invisible waves spread out in a turbulent manner as the surroundings suddenly darkened as though night had fallen at once. The serene and peaceful feeling was accompanied by the fall of starlight. The animal carcasses first turned sluggish before collapsing, returning to their eternal rest. The mummy also slowed down its pace, its motions growing slower and slower. But it didn't lie back down. Directly using a Beyonder characteristic isn't very effective after all. Furthermore, the negative effects are nothing trivial. Klein couldn't help but cover his mouth with his left hand to yawn. He made Creeping Hunger turn pale and become dyed in a gloomy green. It used the power of a zombie to control the deceased in front of him. The two stacked Beyonder effects finally calmed the mummy down. With embedded onyx gems for eyes, it slowly walked to Klein's side and stood there silently as though it was the most professional servant. Unfortunately, it has hexes. From inside his spirit body, Klein immediately took out a golden bead with the styles of the ancient Highlands kingdom. On its surface was deeply engraved bluish-green patterns. It came from Sharon and was specially prepared for the Tutansis II mummy. It could effectively suppress and put an end to the hexes. Otherwise, how could the Wraith dare to cast her sights on the pharaoh mummy? After twiddling the golden bead, Klein made the Tutansis II mummy open its mouth before stuffing the bead into the mask's gap where the mouth was. In just a few seconds, the gloominess of the surroundings vanished. After doing all of this, he took a step forward and, with his spirit body state, possessed the mummy. Then, without any hesitation, he ended the summoning and returned above the gray fog. This mummy had already become his zombie, allowing him to release it just like he did with his former marionette, Senor. There was no need for him to store it in his body. After doing a bestowment, the mummy which was rich in spirituality returned to the real world and arrived inside the cheap motel. After Klein cleaned up the traces, he reached out his right hand, about to grab the mummy's shoulder and teleport back to the two-bedroom apartment where Merrick and Sharon were. But after taking a look at the oil-stained yellowish-brown bandages and the dark red liquid on it, Klein silently retracted his right hand and switched to using his gloved left hand. After holding the mummy's shoulder with his left hand, he immediately began to fade, and this effect quickly spread across his body. In just a flash, Klein and the mummy had returned to the apartment from before. He wasn't in a rush to open the door to present it to Sharon and Merrick. He took out his golden pocket watch and opened it. Another 36 seconds before it's 5 minutes. Klein made the mummy pull out a chair and sit down leisurely. After a while, he finally heard a knock on the door. "Come on in," Klein replied with a smile as he controlled the mummy to walk over. When the door creaked open, the thin figure with the golden, patterned mask and yellowish-brown bandages was reflected in the duo's eyes. This figure's onyx gems shimmered before it swiftly lay itself down on the ground. Momentarily, Sharon and Merrick were at a loss for words. Having already used a wall of spirituality to isolate Azek's copper whistle, Klein dispelled his control over the zombie and pointed at it with a smile. "I'm leaving the rest to you. And that brings the curtain down for my directed play." Klein commented inwardly as he silently took in the sensation of his potion rapidly digesting. This made him believe that it didn't need to take him up until the end of the year to consider the problem of advancing to the level of a demigod. It might be expedited by 2 or even 3 months. Furthermore, with this digestion, the number of marionettes he could control finally rose to 2. The maximum limit reached 200 meters. Faced with enemies with the same level of spirit body as his, gaining initial control of the target and completely converting them into a marionette was respectively reduced to 10 seconds and 150 seconds. The range had also been expanded to 10 meters. You really succeeded. Merrick's eyes stared at the Tuttensis II mummy as he couldn't help but mutter. He could never have imagined that they could succeed. Sherlock Moriarty had managed to successfully steal something 4 demigods and 2 terrifying sealed artifacts were vying for. Furthermore, this gentleman had previously returned empty-handed. Could it be that the mummy had delivered itself? Deep inside Sharon's blue eyes, her emotions were concealed and they were completely calm. She scrutinized the target. After confirming that it was the pharaoh mummy and that it was Tuttensis II, she cast her gaze to Sherlock Moriarty, who was seated with his legs crossed. She opened her mouth slightly before closing them. Thank you. I'll mail you the corresponding payment. I'll wish you, all the best in everything, Klein replied sincerely. He then silently had a poignant thought. If Miss Sharon can successfully advance to Sequence 4, it means I'll have an additional demigod-level helper. The saying from the Footaholic Empire is apt: rely on your parents at home, depend on your friends when out. The more demigod-level friends, the merrier. Our tarot club needs to develop more friends and reduce our enemies. However, my enemies seem to be ever increasing. Having thought of that, Klein exhorted them. Be careful of being hunted down. The Tuttensis II mummy had too many of its items in the lone military's possession. It was very simple for them to use beyonder methods to lock onto it. Klein's paper angel interference was only effective for a limited amount of time. Of course, he believed that Sharon and Merrick were prepared, otherwise, they wouldn't have had thoughts on stealing the pharaoh's mummy. Likewise, he also believed that they could deal with the origins of the grey metal masks and special fireworks. If it's Danitz, he would most likely say, it didn't cross my mind. Klein did a comparison with a particular hunter failure. Sharon nodded, indicating that she would take note. Then, she made the Tuttensis II mummy into her zombie and brought it into the spirit world. Thank you for your help. Merrick, who stayed behind in the room, exhaled. He composed his surging emotions and bowed at Sherlock Moriarty. Following that, he left the room, removed his disguise, and blended into the crowd in East Borough. During this process, Klein remained sitting in his chair as he silently watched them leave. At some point in time, his figure also vanished. In an apartment near Pritz Harbor. The lone military's golden-eyed demigod entered and said to his partner, the lady in the evening gown, nothing for now. That's expected. If he wasn't certain of success, that mysterious person wouldn't have come to steal the Tuttensis II mummy, the lady said in a heavy voice. However, we can relax our investigation scope. Those fireworks, that mask, those clothes, and that taunting bow should lead us to something. She was certain that the Tuttensis II mummy's loss wasn't done by the two-rose school of thought demigods. If it was part of their plan, there was no need for them to carry out that step only when they were in dire straits. They had almost failed to escape. The golden-eyed demigod nodded and said, I had a premonition that something would happen, but unfortunately, we didn't work with the churches for this operation. We didn't have enough manpower. He paused and asked, have you figured out what method that mysterious person used? The lady held up the crown of thorns and stabbed a thorn into her neck. As blood trickled down, she shook her head. Perhaps the removing of the soil with the Tuttensis II mummy's bodily fluid is a ritual. This is a very cunning fellow who's good at deceit. The golden-eyed demigod from the lone military nodded in agreement. Indeed. It's similar in style to certain fellows from the Intis intelligence agencies. However, just seconds after he took away the soil, the Tuttensis II mummy vanished. It's unlikely that he could complete a ritual in time. The lady looked down at the crown of thorns that was embedded in her neck. Slightly slow to react, she said, perhaps he, or they, had already set up the other steps of the ritual. Once he teleported back, he immediately threw the soil onto the altar, completing the final step. Of course, it's not necessarily a ritual. It might also be a sealed artifact that achieves a certain effect with the help of bodily fluids. There are too many possibilities for this. Although sealed artifacts' main effects and negative effects mostly adhered to the sequence traits of the 22 pathways, allowing researchers to barely come up with a hypothesis. Just like how everyone had different personalities, sealed artifacts were different. Perhaps due to fusing with an object, the environment when formed, the possible existence of a high-level sequence's aura, or a curse from the original owner, these resulted in all kinds of strange traits that made them not viable for testing. No one could imagine ahead of time the different permutations and list them all out. The golden-eyed demigod pulled out a chair and sat. This is very difficult to investigate, so we can temporarily not consider it. However, you missed out on a direction for the investigation. Do you still remember that hurricane? It swept up Tutmosis II's sarcophagus, causing the ritualistic items, which is also the bodily fluids to leak out, and it also caused the mummy to tumble out. This enabled the condition for zombifying it. In short, this established the foundation for the subsequent development, so it can be confirmed that this was done by the mysterious man or his helper. The turbidness in the lady's eyes grew faint as she slowly removed the crown of thorns. Do you mean that, with the Church of Storms in control of the Sailor pathway and the high-sequence formulas and Beyonder characteristics, there won't be many Beyonders or mystical items that can use hurricane? Thus, this is a clue that we can follow to find their trail? The golden-eyed demigod nodded. Also, I remember that not long ago, there was a case in East Borough. The Aurora Order's Mr. X was assassinated at a gathering he convened himself. Lightning storm and hurricane had been used at the scene. This garnered a lot of attention from the Church of Storms, and they have been constantly looking for clues. To have two hurricanes happen in the same area in a short period of time and not belong to official organizations, this can't be a coincidence. I believe it can be preliminarily determined that there is a connection. The group of people who killed Mr. X and stole the mummy might be one and the same. We need to join forces with the Church of Storms to investigate. The lady lowered the crown of thorns and thought. That's a good angle. Also, from their goals and motives, we can figure out certain things. People who want to use a mummy as a zombie wouldn't take such a high risk by attempting a theft. I suspect that, to those people, the Tutmosis II mummy is something they attach additional importance to. Something that's key to a ritual? The golden-eyed demigod deliberated as he said, from the scene, the one who was carrying something special to attract the mummy was likely a wraith or had the corresponding mystical item. Combining the goals and motive, I have a theory. The lady's heart stirred as she blurted out, members of the Temperance faction that escaped from the Rose School of Thought? Yes. The golden-eyed demigod nodded. Although the creation of mummies is influenced by aspects like the faith in death and sun worship, despite the Rose School of Thought occupying a ruling position in the Highlands, Daly, and other places, it hasn't forbidden such burial practices. This implies that mummies are of use to them. Perhaps it's the ritual requirement of one of the sequences. Upon saying this, he chuckled in a self-deprecating tone. There's another possibility. To show off and act. That bunch of people might not really want the mummy. It just happened to satisfy certain conditions, giving them the opportunity to steal. Hence, they did a grand act. To some sequences of particular pathways, this is key to digesting the potion. As a demigod, he was knowledgeable, so he naturally made many connections. The lady deliberated and said in a heavy voice, I suspect that it's not just one possibility but a potpourri of reasons. We shall use this as the foundation for our investigations. Backland, Cherwood Borough. In a building near the Tussock River. The silent one Mamosi sat in front of a square table that had a tablecloth spread across it with golden nails placed on it. It said in a deep voice, Zatwin, who do you think stole the Khedive mummy? Not far behind him, a figure rapidly appeared on a piano bench. This figure wore a black clergyman's robe with a black glove on his left hand. His face was thin, and his skin color was brown. His eyes were recessed like a dried corpse. His mustache hair was black at the root and white outwards. They extended from his mouth all the way to his ear. However, it wasn't thick and was rather short. It appeared rather sparse. Zatwin's eyes were close to his skin color. Despite having the bearing of a priest, he gave off a cold and terrifying feeling. He appeared to be someone who would transform amidst silence. Thinking, he said, there are only a handful of people who yearn for a Khedive mummy and would be willing to take the risk to battle demigods. And here in Backland, there's only Sharon. She has likely received Rionette Tinker's help, otherwise, it's impossible for her to succeed. Momosi picked up a golden nail covered in dense patterns. After a few seconds of silence, he said, who was the one who teleported? It doesn't resemble Gehrman Sparrow. Another helper Sharon hired? Perhaps. Zatwin coughed as his pale face flushed blue. I believe we need to think of a way to pray to Mother Tree. We should be able to receive a revelation. Momosi nodded gently and stabbed the golden nail through his bottom lip. Upon seeing this, Zatwin covered his mouth and slowly got up. He staggered down to the first floor in preparation to leave and return to his hideout. On the first floor, he saw a dark environment with shimmering candlelight. The fragrance of food wafted from different directions, filling the air. The residential buildings in the nearby area were terraces. Facing the street on the first floor were shops. The contact point of the Rose School of Thought was in a restaurant which mainly served southern continent cuisine. As he had suffered quite serious injuries in the operation, Zatwin didn't wish to maintain his state as an evil spirit. It was too great a burden on the injured him, therefore, he had changed into a black clergyman's robe as he hobbled to the entrance. At this moment, a customer walked into the restaurant. This customer wore a black formal suit with black pants and leather shoes. He had a pair of black eyes and a thin face. He had a slightly broad forehead as he wore a monocle and a very tall top hat. As he casually glanced around, his gaze landed on Zatwin. Upon seeing the black glove Zatwin was wearing on his left hand, the ends of the customer's mouth curled slightly. He shook his head with a smile, seemingly a little disappointed. Then, he entered the restaurant, brushing past Zatwin who had stared back with a maleficent look. Zatwin didn't pay too much attention as he walked out and reached the streets. Under the illumination of the street lamps, the night's cool breeze blew at him, causing the Rose School of Thought Demigod to suddenly tremble. Zatwin knew that this was a result of his spiritual perception being triggered. With his heart tightening, he immediately looked down at his hands, surprised to realize that the black glove on his left hand was gone. Gone. As a demigod, Zatwin didn't know when the sealed artifact on his hand disappeared. He quickly turned around and looked into the restaurant as the image of the man from before suddenly surfaced in his mind. Soon, he locked onto the target's aura and found that he was still inside the restaurant. The man had even called out to the waiter to bring him a menu. Zatwin originally had thoughts of using Mirror Blink to possess the man. But for some unknown reason, his hands shook involuntarily. In an indescribable manner, he believed that a dangerous and terrifying enemy hid in his surroundings. Just as this thought flashed past his mind, Zatwin subconsciously took a step to the side, walking to the end of the street as though nothing had happened. In an apartment in Sherwood Borough, Furs was reading the latest issue of Ladies' Aesthetic when she suddenly heard a key turn and the sound of the door opening. "Why are you so late today?" She looked towards the door where Zio stood. Zio ruffled her short blonde hair and said, "When I was almost home, I saw a meetup mark from MI9. It was urgent." "What happened this time?" With piqued interest, Furs lowered the magazine in her hand. "A continuation of Mr. X's assassination." Zio bent down to switch to her home slippers and said in passing. The look on Furs's face froze as her eyes darted about slightly. "Any clues?" "Not really. Back then, a hurricane at the demigod level appeared. It's not common outside the Church of Storms, and just earlier tonight, there was a small-scale hurricane attack at the dock at Pritz Harbor. A pharaoh mummy was stolen away in the chaos," Zio explained simply. MI9 suspect that the two cases were done by the same group of people, so they are pressing informants like us to work harder at gathering intel and finding clues. My Lamino's travel still has a hurricane. Mr. Gehrman Sparrow? Why is he stealing a pharaoh mummy? Furs forced a smile. Perhaps it was done by the Church of Storms? Zio rolled her eyes at her and quickly walked into the kitchen in search of food. Early morning, 160 Buckland Street. Moments after Klein finished washing up, and before he could open the door to let Richardson in, his spiritual perception was triggered. He saw Miss Messenger's headless body walk out of the void with 4 heads in hand. One of them was biting down on a rather thick envelope. Opening its mouth, a large pile of gold coins was spat out. I can finally repay my debt. Klein glanced at Rionette Tinker's 4 necklace heads and said in relief, I remember still owing you 3,413 gold coins. You can take the last installment away. Meanwhile, he had the baffling feeling that the pile of gold coins looked familiar. However, he didn't think too much about it because all the gold coins looked familiar to him. Upon hearing Klein's words, one of the 4 heads which Rionette Tinker held immediately said, all right. It opened its mouth and immediately sucked back most of the gold coins. Where it was stored was an unknown. Taking a look at the dozens of shiny gold coins left, Klein reached out to receive the rather thick envelope. He quickly opened it and scanned its opening. Indeed, it was the detailed information regarding spirit world plunderers. After Miss Messenger returned to the spirit world, he put away the gold coins, drew the curtains, and sat down under the morning sun, seriously reading the neat and tidy handwriting. Thank you once again for your help. The Tuttensis 2 mummy is part of the advancement ritual for me. It holds deep meaning for me. Spirit world plunderers live in the depths of the spirit world. They're extremely rare, rich in intelligence, and very aggressive. They can capture or kill creatures and make them soul avatars. Their souls can turn into their true soul's appearance, giving them similar performance and traits. They can also disguise themselves as other spirit world creatures. When encountering them, perhaps all the spirit world creatures around belong to them. They might be soul avatars that mustn't be neglected. This creature can effectively influence the thought processes of their prey, causing them to enter a desensitized state. Their true soul body has potent spirituality. In clashes of such nature, they are often at a noticeable advantage. They're very difficult to find. At present, there is only one place with signs of their activity. The spirit world's Calderon City. This is a legendary city of mysterious and unknown origins. On this front, there are 3 theories about them. One is that it was once Death's residence, the entrance to the underworld. 2, it's the divine kingdom left behind by a dead ancient deity from the second epoch. Attracted by the spirit world, it sank and slowly transformed into a real yet illusory city. 3, it's a real city that was devoured by the spirit world during the cataclysm. Regardless of the theory, it elucidates one point: this city is very dangerous. It has many special and strange aspects about it. I do not have the mysticism coordinates of Calderon City. Most high-level spirit world creatures aren't aware either. I can provide 2 suggestions. First is to use a special secret deed ritual to pray to Red Light Iron Moria to receive the corresponding answer. I won't describe in detail what Red Light is. If you aren't aware, you can write to ask me again. The second is to find someone from the Abraham family. They have the legacy of the Traveler's Pathway, and they have done a deep exploration of the spirit world. Even when writing a letter, Miss Sharon exudes an extremely restrained feeling. Indeed, the pharaoh mummy is meant for the puppet's ritual. Back then, the evil spirit in the ruin had said that it could be one of the components of the ritual. Therefore, the ritual's exact requirement is to use a high-sequence Beyonder's corpse after death, one that still maintains a level of spirituality, or to use an evil spirit that results from the resentment of death. Haha, can I pray to Orange Light to get him to help me ask Red Light? To others, finding Calderon City is a very difficult task, but to me, it's extremely simple. I can directly give this task to Miss Magician. She has just contributed greatly to the Abraham family. I hope the first theory about Calderon City is correct. That way, once I make contact with Mr. Azek, I can see the dangerous residents of this mysterious city line up in 2 rows as they welcome me. Klein shook his head, throwing such a beautiful fantasy to the back of his mind. He scrutinized the information regarding spirit world plunderers and confirmed that they had partial characteristics of marionettist and bizarro sorcerer. They were rather dangerous high-level spirit world creatures. To make soul avatars have the same appearance, performance, and traits of their true souls is identical to a bizarro sorcerer's ability to give their powers to a marionette. At Zeradal's level, perhaps at Sequence 3 Scholar of Yore, perhaps he can temporarily give certain beyonder powers to other creatures that are marionettes? Klein began tearing the letter while in thought as he flicked his wrist and engulfed the letter in scarlet-red flames, burning them into ashes that fell into the trash bin. After reining in his thoughts, while dressed in pajamas, he walked to his bedroom's door to get Richardson to come in to help him change his clothes. Under St. Samuel Cathedral. As usual, Leonard Mitchell was leaning back into his chair with his legs raised on the desk. There was nothing abnormal about his expression, but he was thinking about Amon deep down. Ever since he knew that the angel had arrived in Backland, Pallas Zoroast inside him had become abnormally silent. He wasn't as active as before to proactively speak or give suggestions. If not for the answers he received when he posed questions, Leonard would have even suspected that old man had secretly sneaked off to find another host to parasitize. Amidst his thoughts, his Red Gloves captain, Nighthawk's deacon, Soest, walked in. How was the interrogation? Any results? The Red Gloves in the room who were dealing with their own matters quickly cast their gaze to the door. Late last night, they had just finished a mission. They had captured 3 numinous episcopate members that they had been tracking for quite some time. Now, they were awaiting the results of the interrogation. Soest sternly surveyed the room and said, "We had contributed greatly in this, but the results aren't something good. Based on the testimony of the 3 numinous episcopate members, as well as the information the church had previously gathered, we can come to a preliminary conclusion that the numinous episcopate has fractured between reviving death or creating artificial death. The latter has already achieved some progress and benefited significantly from it. They are filled with animosity towards Lone and to us. They plan to put parts of the experiments of artificial death in Backland. Yes, their thoughts are the same as your present concerns. Even if the experiment fails, there's a chance of severely damaging the capital of capitals." Leonard instantly snapped out of his daze as he exchanged looks with Cindy and Bob, seeing the surprise and rage in each other's eyes. At this moment, Soest rapped the side of the table to stop the members from further discussion. He cleared his throat and said, "Our new mission is to head to the southern continent to find the key members of the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction based on clues gleaned from the testimonies we received. We need to figure out how many remnant thorns are left in Backland before uprooting each and every one of them. We will receive help from Ma'am Daly on this mission. And the church will give her the potion as an advanced payment, helping her prepare the ritual so that she can become a gatekeeper before she heads off. In addition, the high-ranking deacon in charge of the southern continent, Her Excellency, the goddesses Ilia, and the local Nighthawks, will provide us with help, giving us the corresponding sealed artifacts and helping us with the preliminary investigations. Ladies and gentlemen, head back to rest for a day and prepare yourselves. We will set off tomorrow night." "Yes, Captain." Cindy, Bob, and company stood up and replied. Leonard stood up as well, but he didn't say a word. The first thought that flashed in his mind was, "I can use this opportunity to leave Backland to escape the threat of Amon." After returning to 7 Pinster Street, he asked with a suppressed tone after closing the door and drawing the curtains, "Old man, problem solved. I believe a normal assignment for Red Gloves won't garner the suspicion of Amon, right?" The slightly aged voice in his mind replied slowly, "No." Leonard could tell that old man's voice appeared much more relaxed. As his mind stirred, he considered for a moment and said, "Should I write to Klein Moretti and tell him that we will be leaving Backland for a very long period of time? After all, he was the one who warned us that Amon is here." Pallas Zoroast replied in the same tone, "Write it if you wish." Leonard exhaled, pulled out a piece of paper, and picked up a fountain pen. He deliberated for a moment and lowered his wrist to write. "I have a mission that will require me to leave Backland." Looking at this short sentence, Leonard put down his pen and folded the letter. Soon, he finished preparing the ritual to summon the messenger. He lit a candle, took a step back, and said in ancient Hermes, I summon in my name." The spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, the messenger that belongs to Gehrman Sparrow. The howling of wind sounded in the room as it turned intense. The candlelight burgeoned as it was tainted with paleness. A beautiful blonde, red-eyed head appeared from within. Leonard pricked his brows, and just as he was about to speak, he saw that what followed the head wasn't a complete neck, but a hand grabbing the hair. Rionette Tinker, in her dark and complicated dress, quickly walked out. The four heads in her hand turned in unison to look at Leonard Mitchell as they spoke one after another. You want to send a letter? This spirit world creature looks powerful. This is a perk that Klein has for joining that secret organization? As Leonard thought, he nodded and said, yes. The four heads held by Rionette Tinker spoke one after another. You need to pay 1 gold coin. 1 gold coin? Messengers from the mysterious world also collect money? Leonard was somewhat astounded but was at a loss for a reaction. All he could do was reach into his pocket and take out a gold coin. Only then did Rionette Tinker raise two of her blonde, red-eyed heads to grab the letter and gold coin. Following that, she stepped into the void and vanished. After the candle was restored to normal, Leonard muttered with a laugh, what a strange messenger. Just as he said that, the slightly aged voice of Pallas Zoroast echoed in his mind. It's best you do not speak negatively behind her back. Her? Old man actually addressed a messenger as a her? A messenger can be a her? Leonard's eyes widened immediately. Pallas coughed slightly. Her state is very strange, not better than mine. In short, that organization that believes in the fool is more, when making contact or cooperating with Klein Moretti, it's best you be more careful. After saying that, the parasite fell silent without saying another word. Leonard actually wants to use a mission to leave Backland so as to avoid the threat from Amon? This is an idea the grandpa came up with? That's way too cowardly, no? Klein scanned the letter he received and silently muttered. He began seriously considering the idea of using the arms deal as an excuse to quickly leave Backland for a period of time. After some consideration, Klein, who already had such a plan, smoothly cleared up his thoughts and decided on his plan of action. Pa. He flicked the piece of paper in his right hand, looking up from the soaring scarlet flames at Rionette Tinker. He planned on taking out a lone gold coin to provide payment. However, Miss Messenger had already left. There was no one in front of him. Not collecting payment? Klein was first taken aback before he made the connection. He suspected that Rionette Tinker had proactively asked for payment after being used to collecting gold coins from non-contractees. Perhaps Miss Messenger didn't say anything, she just stared at Leonard with those 8 eyes on the 4 heads of hers while waiting for him to pay the gold coin. Yet, this fellow didn't realize it at all, trying to forcefully end the summon, only to have his neck snapped. Klein hissed in alarm as he used the gold coin he had just taken out to do the divination. He received the result that Leonard Miss Messenger was still alive and doing fine. He breathed a sigh of relief, put away the gold coin, and called out, Richardson. The half-opened room's door opened without a sound as Richardson walked in and politely asked, Sir, how may I be of service? Please bring the butler here. As Klein instructed, he sighed inwardly. He had really been spoiled by the luxurious life. Even when getting someone at home, he wouldn't take even half a step. He had to do it through his valet. Well, this is an acting requirement, he said silently to himself. Minutes later, the white-gloved Walter came to the 3rd floor and let his arms hang to his side. He stood in a standard posture to the side of Dwayne Dantes, awaiting his employer's instructions. Klein had already considered his words, so he unhurriedly said, Go to Member of Parliament Mock's place to inform him that I've prepared the first installment. Also, prepare a carriage. I will be heading to the Bursary Foundation in the morning and will return in the afternoon. If Member of Parliament Mock doesn't have time for me in the afternoon, head over to Dr. Aaron's place, saying that I'll pay a visit in the afternoon. Klein had already taken out £10,000 from above the grey fog and had stored it in a tiny leather briefcase. He was waiting for the opportune time to complete the preparation work of the arms deal transaction. And to air the cache of the grey fog smell, he had deliberately teleported to the sea, feeding creeping hunger in passing. He was afraid that Amon, who also knew of the grey fog's existence, would detect the special smell while being in the same city, thus, seeking out the location of the treasure he was yearning for. "All right, sir." Walter didn't ask his employer how he had gathered the first installment. If memory served him right, Dwayne Dantes hadn't been to the bank recently. Of course, this wasn't something to be bothered with. Often, foreigners, especially tycoons from Desi or Mid-Seashire, would prepare briefcases filled with large sums of money ahead of time. 22, Phelps Street, Lone Charity Bursary Foundation Headquarters. Klein walked through the main door and went straight to the second floor where he found the reception room for directors. As an honorary director who occasionally participated in certain work, he didn't have an office here, but he could use the reception room. He clenched his right hand into a fist and held it to his mouth, deliberately coughing before stepping into the reception room. In there, he sat on the sofa. After a short wait, he stood up again and said to Richardson, who was waiting beside him, "I'll first head to the washroom." After buttoning his coat, Klein stepped out of the room and happened to meet Justice Audrey walking out of her own office. This noble lady was wearing a rather simple dress today. It was white adorned with dark green. Her sleeves and collars had frills, and at her chest were layers of intercrossed lace that formed a bow tie-like flower. She didn't even wear any jewelry. She had a girdle which he couldn't tell, but near her left arm, her clothes clung to her skin when the wind blew, allowing a slight protrusion to appear. "Good morning, Miss Audrey." Klein wore a look of pleasant surprise as though it was a chance encounter. Audrey glanced at the good-looking Dwayne Dantes with grey sideburns and replied with a smile, "Good morning, Mr. Dantes." She had wanted to cheerfully say "long time no see" to snide at him for not being to the Bursary Foundation ever since the opening ceremony. But considering how their relationship was that of acquaintances, she held back from saying such words. Klein rubbed his temples and shook his head with a wry smile. "I'm very sorry that I'm only coming today. I've been very busy recently. I can foresee myself being even busier in time to come. I might make a trip to the southern continent to handle certain matters." The reason why he specially came was that he wanted to inform Miss Justice that he was leaving Backland for some time. It was to express his sincerity, hoping that this noble lady could help him watch the Bursary Foundation and allow it to be operated smoothly. To Klein, he wished from the bottom of his heart that the Bursary Foundation could help more of the poor that required assistance. Southern continent? Audrey interpreted the sincerity in Dwayne Dantes's words as she asked in surprise. Klein laughed and replied, "For business." At that instant, the first thought that came to Audrey's mind was, which Sequence 5 is about to lose his life? Upon sensing Miss Justice making some unpleasant assumptions, Klein added, "It's a partnership with the military for the sale of some necessities." "What's the meaning behind this? Dwayne Dantes's identity is used to probe intel from the military?" Audrey was somewhat enlightened as she raised her right hand and gestured 4 times in a clockwise fashion. She said with a bright smile, "May the goddess bless you so that everything goes smoothly." After habitually saying that, she sensed that there was something discordant about that. She had wished that the goddess would bless a blessed of Mr. Fool. This is probably closer to a curse, right? Will Mr. Gehrman Sparrow be angry? No, he's actually a kind-hearted person deep down. And I did it without any malicious intent. The one who returns from the southern continent is probably another blessed who's playing Dwayne Dantes, right? Will it be a demigod? Audrey didn't notice it as her thoughts wandered. Klein gave an exasperated smile as he equally drew the crimson moon on his chest in a familiar manner. "May the goddess bless us all. And that she doesn't smite us with divine punishment," he added silently. Following that, he spoke as though it was a casual chat. "Have you been going to the schools to do some promotions lately?" "Yes." When this was mentioned, Audrey's expression seemed to radiate. She was proud and happy that she had finally done something substantial. Just as she nodded with some strength, her green eyes revealed a look of sadness. After visiting a few public primary schools, I found many of the children there very pitiful. To save money, they bring their own rye bread for lunch, matching it with a cup of water. Upon saying that, she looked at Dwayne Dantes and said, somewhat embarrassed, I know that they're temporarily not bringing me along to the night schools and Sunday schools to prevent me from seeing something worse. But I can imagine things just like those workers who can only live for a few years once they start working at the factories. This was something that the World Gearman Sparrow had once told her. It was the first time she knew of the real situation of the lower class of Backland, but having not seen them with her own eyes, all she could do was rely on her imagination. Klein sighed and said, perhaps. It's worse than you can imagine. There's no need to worry. Once you showcase your ability and win their trust, you will become one of them. Okay. Audrey nodded, as though in thought about how she could showcase herself better. Klein didn't continue on the conversation. After all, this was only their third meeting. They had only exchanged a few words previously, so having too long a conversation easily garnered suspicion. He pointed at the washroom and apologized before opening up his gate to walk over. Audrey looked at Dwayne Dantes's back and fell silent as she muttered, what will it be like if it's worse? After receiving a reply from Mocht, inviting him to the East Balham Military Veterans Mess in the evening, Klein followed his plan. Hence, he visited Dr. Aaron at 4 in the afternoon. Mr. Dantes, your butler didn't inform me of the reason for your visit. As his wife was about a month from being due, Dr. Aaron had declined most of his work, and most of the time he had stayed at home. Towards the sudden visit of Dwayne Dantes, who he wasn't too familiar with, he was rather perplexed. Furthermore, with him not being good at interpersonal relationships, he posed the question after exchanging some pleasantries. Klein smiled. This is the thing. I might be heading to the southern continent soon. As you know, the weather there is humid and hot. There are all kinds of insects and diseases there. I wish to prepare some medicine ahead of time to prevent any accidents from happening. I wonder if you have any suggestions. I'm really sorry, but you are the only excellent doctor I know of. Dr. Aaron accepted his explanation and began seriously thinking before giving him the names of some medicine. Towards the end, Klein, who had written a note filled with words, used the excuse of a stomachache to use the washroom on the first floor. The washroom's mirror suddenly darkened as though it was covered by a thick shadow. And in the middle of the shadow, a black pram slowly steered near. In it was a blurry child wrapped in silver silk. What is it this time? Wuxia questioned using his bright voice. Klein coughed dryly and forced a smile. You should have heard that I'll be heading to the southern continent. I don't wish to miss your birth, so I would like to know when you plan to have your birthday. Wuxia sucked at his thumb and said, I don't know. Even an angel can't control when he will be born? Klein asked in surprise. Wuxia replied hesitantly, you don't understand. I've already identified 3 dates. They have unique meaning when it comes to fate, but I haven't decided. I still find it blurry. Perhaps only when the time comes will I suddenly understand what I should do. Is this decidophobia? It also gives the strong vibes of a charlatan. Klein crossed his hands and indiscernibly rubbed them. Then how would I be able to receive notice in time so that I can return in time to complete the transaction with you? Oh, that paper crane can no longer be used. Upon hearing Klein's question, the infant wrapped in silver silk raised his fleshy arms and threw them up. I can't do anything about it either. I'm still in my mother's womb. Although you can no longer ride on that paper crane, it can still help me locate you. If there's anything, I will inform you. Klein had already expected such an answer from Wuxia. He maintained his smile and explained, that paper crane is already damaged. I think it will have problems locating my position. Following that, he gave his suggestion. Perhaps we can do this, you can summon my messenger when you're born to write to me. He wasn't too worried that Wuxia's birth would result in anything abnormal, causing the snake of fate to have to change locations while in a baby's body. That would prevent him from contacting him again. Inside the black pram, Wuxia gaped his mouth before closing it again, momentarily not giving an answer. After a few seconds, the infant's mouth curled and said, "Do you think that's realistic? Not only are you getting a newborn to write a letter to you, he still needs to hold a ritual and summon a messenger?" Klein chuckled and said, "But you're a snake of fate. The laws of nature still need to be respected." Wuxia threw down his arms and smacked the cushion beside him. This infant thought for a moment and said, "Let's do this. Get someone to watch this area. Once they realize an infant is born, they can immediately inform you." Klein's eyes darted about for a while before saying, "That works." On this matter, he had many people he could get help from. He could hire a gangster through Sharon and inform him via his messenger, or he could get the usually free Emlyn White to do it. He could also hire bounty hunter, Miss Zio, letting Miss Magician be responsible for informing the World Gearman Sparrow of the developments. He could also get Erodes to take note of the surroundings and report to him through a one-way communication method. However, that fellow, Emlyn's nose is very sharp. I wonder if he will smell the placenta blood and be able to identify what it truly is. If that's the case, it might result in him suffering the impact of seeing a mythical creature. His intelligence will drop and he will turn mentally unsound to the point of his body mutating. Klein hurriedly asked before Wuxia's pram retreated into the shadows, "I have a, teacher who I haven't been in contact for a while. Can you help me read his current fate? His name is Azek Eggers." As Mr. Azek hadn't replied yet, Klein couldn't help but feel worried. Back when he used the copper whistle to do a divination above the gray fog, all he saw was a silent and deep darkness. He heard a dragged-out and distant breathing, making it impossible for him to interpret what the dream meant. Wuxia sucked at his thumb and said, "He's in a state of metamorphosis. It might be good, but it might also be bad. That's all that can be seen because that teacher of yours has something special on him." Something special? Something directly derived from Death's godhood? Metamorphosis? This is referring to Mr. Azek's recovery of more memories, so he's in a slumber to recover his corresponding strength? Klein thought as he bowed. "Thank you for your answer." Wuxia turned his head and looked to the side. Klein thought and gave a warning. "Based on what I know, Blasphemer Amon is here in Backland. Of course, it's most likely an avatar." Wuxia was taken aback for a moment before chuckling. "It's a bane for you, but a boon for me. Amon and Ouroboros are absolute enemies. No, a more accurate description is that he hates the true creator. Amon is often thinking of means to pull him down from his throne as a god, while Ouroboros is loyal to that evil god." After saying that, the black pram retreated into the shadows as everything was restored to normal. Amon hates the true creator? I'm increasingly convinced that the true creator was one of the participants in the sharing of the ancient sun god. He is the black infant in the middle of the storm angel, white angel, and wisdom angel. Klein breathed a sigh of relief. He took 2 steps forward, turned on the tap, and washed his hands. In the evening at the East Balam Military Veterans Mess, Klein didn't immediately meet the long-faced Colonel Calvin. After he placed the briefcase with 10,000 pounds into a heavy safe deposit box, he followed Mocked to have a buffet meal at this high-end club. The dishes here mainly served southern continent cuisine. There was cream bread made from tapioca flour, ice cream dripped in the berry juice of a lilac tree, assorted seafood broth with coconut milk and palm butter, cow innards that was cooked with pepper, tomatoes, and onions, hagenti seared roasted meat, broth made from Paws Valley's delights, as well as steak and roasted squid. Compared to other places, the ingredients used here were rather high-end. The flavors were also in authentic southern continent styles, leaving Klein rather satisfied. If not for his need to maintain his image, he felt that eating a mouthful of seared roasted meat and having a mouthful of ice cream would be an excellent feeling. Indeed, I prefer food that has stronger flavors. The thing that satisfied me the most today was that aperitif. If Member of Parliament Mocked hadn't mentioned it in passing, I would have thought that it was a lightly flavored fruit juice. The pale gold liquid with 2 lemons soaked in it and a few pieces of ice makes it sweet but a little sour. There's no alcoholic taste to it, and it's refreshing. It instantly just draws away the heat from the body. Klein placed his napkin on the plate as he recounted the feelings he just had. At this moment, Mocht returned from the washroom. He smiled as he bent down and whispered into Dwayne Dantes' ear, "Same room as before." "All right." Klein got up, went to the room with the safe deposit box, and took out the small leather briefcase with 10,000 pounds before heading over to the activity room where he had previously met Colonel Calvin twice. Calvin, with his long face, was already waiting inside. When he caught sight of the briefcase in Dwayne Dantes' hand, he got up with a smile. "You really are a gentleman of action. I like such attitudes when handling matters." As he spoke, he extended his right hand and shook Dwayne Dantes' hand. Klein then handed the briefcase to him and said with a humble smile, "As a merchant, if one isn't decisive and fast when facing an opportunity to make money, that means that they aren't suitable for this occupation." Calvin sat back down and opened the briefcase in front of Dwayne Dantes and mocked. He roughly counted the neat stacks of cash. He quickly completed the confirmation check, closed the briefcase, and looked up at Dwayne Dantes. "What other thoughts do you have towards the exact details of the transaction?" Klein deliberately wore a look as though he was organizing his words. After a few seconds, he said, "I'm planning on heading to the southern continent soon, to West Balam." Seeing Calvin and Mocht show signs of surprise, he added, "I have some matters that aren't convenient to do while bringing plenty of firearms. And to make the transaction go smoothly, some advanced preparations are required." "Heh, I have to put enough importance on this matter. It's a business worth tens of thousands of pounds. I'm thinking of first heading to West Balam to contact clients who have such needs, and to clear out any obvious obstacles. At an agreed-upon time, I'll contact you via telegraph and head to East Balam's border to retrieve the goods." Calvin pondered for a moment and said, "You can send me a telegram after June 20th. I'll give you the details later. In short, after I receive the telegram, I'll inform the officer there and get them to pass the countersign and password to the designated personnel for them to head to the warehouse." Will you need any auxiliary personnel for protection during this time? When do you plan on leaving?" "I only wish to find a place to hide in West Balam where there's no Rose school of thought. The rest can be left to Danitz." "When do I leave?" "I obviously wish to leave today and arrive there today, but that will incur suspicion." Klein considered for 2 seconds and said, "There's no need for any security for the time being. In certain places in the southern continent, having such auxiliary personnel is the main cause for causing conflict. Don't worry, I have plenty of friends in West Balam. Without bringing anything of value, my safety can be guaranteed. As for when I'm leaving, my answer is as soon as possible." Calvin thought for nearly a minute before slowly nodding. "I'll send someone to receive you after dinner tomorrow. The military will have an airship that needs to send goods and personnel to Desi Bay. And it's just a short distance to the southern continent via ship from there. If everything goes smoothly, it will just take 2 to 3 days. Even if there's a storm on the way, requiring a detour of the sea route, it will still take a maximum of a week." "Thank you." Klein sincerely stood up and bowed. From his point of view, leaving Backland with the military was safe enough. He wouldn't be made a target of suspicion. After discussing some details, Klein got up and bade farewell and returned to the foyer in preparation to leave. In the foyer, beside the dining table, there were nearly 10 military-clad or casually dressed men holding a cup of wine gathered. They were chatting and laughing about the recent rumors. When Klein swept his gaze over, he suddenly found a figure somewhat familiar. The man was more than 1.85 meters tall but less than 1.9 meters. He had rather long arms, and his feet were faced outwards to a certain degree. His shoulders were abnormally broad, causing his black suit to appear rather tight. This? Klein's mind raced as his nerves tensed up. He had already recalled the source of the familiarity. It was the demigod that met crazy Captain Connors that night. He was the demigod suspected to be working for a particular faction of the royal family, one who was supervising the human trafficking. Although this high-sequence beyonder was previously wearing a black hood that interfered with divination, preventing his appearance from being exposed. Klein remembered the traits of his body. That was what a faceless was good at. For a second, Klein's act of casually sweeping his gaze paused on that familiar person's figure. He immediately sensed the abnormality in his reaction, since a demigod's spiritual perception wouldn't fail to notice it. His back muscles tensed up as his mind raced, producing figurative sparks. He didn't immediately move his gaze away as he continued looking at the demigod suspected to be from the Black Emperor pathway. He smiled at Mocked and said, "This place really isn't just for veteran officers." This sounded like a result of careful observation, but it was nothing but meaningless chatter. Mocked chuckled. Any club will exceed its original restrictions when it further develops itself. His answer didn't seem to offer anything, but on careful consideration, it did seem to imply something, or perhaps something that was the complete opposite. At this moment, the broad-shouldered and long-armed gentleman in a black suit had also naturally turned his head. He looked at the two men, and he noticed that the tycoon who had donated £15,000 was looking at him and his companions while engaging Member of Parliament Mocked with a whisper. This made him feel that his look of surprise was more of a natural reaction towards learning of his occupation. Then, he retracted his gaze and continued his topic of conversation. And at this moment, Klein's back was covered in a layer of cold sweat, and his legs were going limp. Although he had, in a way, faced the demigod before and had even fought with him, to have such a close encounter in such a small place, with danger happening in a split second, this was a first. And more importantly, he was far from prepared to face a demigod. Not only did he lack a marionette, all he had on him was Death Knell, Azek's copper whistle, and the adventurer's harmonica. The sea god's scepter was impossible to bring on his person. Furthermore, the usage of it had strict environmental limitations, otherwise, it would result in massive damage. If he kept Grizel's travels on him for too long, he might be pulled into the book world. When that happens, it would become troublesome trying to exit it. Creeping hunger was still lacking a seal, so it needed to feed every day. Unless necessary, it was impossible to take it out ahead of time. The Fate Siphon charm was made from a worm of time, so it was an unknown if it would attract him on. Unless he could use it very quickly, Klein obviously lacked the courage to bring it on him. If the demigod who was suspected to be from the Black Emperor pathway had discovered something wrong with him, there was only one optimal solution he could think of. It was to blow the harmonica and summon Miss Messenger to get her to help him escape Backland via the spirit world. He had never thought of letting Rionette Tinker engage in a direct battle while he held Death Knell from the side to find an opportunity to fire. This was Backland, the home ground of the official Beyonders. With Miss Messenger's unique appearance, that man could easily pin a crime on her, and what awaited Klein would be a joint attack on him. There was bound to be increasing numbers of demigods and powerful sealed artifacts. How harrowing. Klein moved his gaze away in a manner that adhered to logic. Using the clown's ability to control his legs, he walked to the door in a completely normal manner. He didn't ask Mocked who those people were, to appear uninterested as a way to prove that it was all just a casual glance. However, that person turning to look at him had exposed his appearance to Klein. He had thick but unmessy black brows with a short and hard crew cut of the same color. He had dark blue eyes and a high nose bridge with a bushy mustache spreading out from his mouth. He had a long face with accentuated outlines as well as callous curves. He had strong masculine vibes and was probably in his 30s or 40s. It was difficult to determine. Just on his appearance alone, Klein felt that he looked more like an Arbiter Pathway's demigod rather than one of the Black Emperor Pathway. Of course, this demigod's bearing was closer to that of a warrior's, but he was too short. Having had a clear look at him, Klein didn't need to inquire further. He could directly get Rhodes to answer him. Even if he was still wary of the magic mirror, he could always commission Miss Zio, Miss Sharon, and company to do a simple background check. He believed that no matter how well hidden this demigod was, it was unlikely for him to have a low-ranking position. It would be easy to figure out who he was. 1 step. 2 steps. 3 steps. Klein left the East Balham military veterans mess in a normal manner. When he boarded the carriage, he leaned on the wall, closed his eyes, and kept silent for a few seconds. Inwardly, he let out a long sigh. The disconnected trail of clues leading to the truth of the great smog of Backland has finally been connected again. He didn't open his eyes or say a word, as though he was recounting the business problems he had previously discussed. But in fact, it was to quell his emotions that had been left in an upheaval. During this process, Klein realized that Richardson had tried to speak a few times, only to shut his mouth again, doing so as though he was stumped. Ultimately, he didn't say a word, focused on preparing marquee black tea for his employer. Due to his previous encounter, Klein momentarily didn't have the capacity to be bothered about him and had pretended to not notice it. Amidst the silent atmosphere and grinding wheels, they returned to 160 Buckland Street. When he reached the third floor, Klein was just about to head for the bathtub that had been prepared by the lady's maid when Richardson, who was holding his hat and cane, took 2 steps forward and respectfully said, "Sir, are you heading to the southern continent soon?" "Yes," Klein replied frankly. He had even prepared £500 in cash to hand to housekeeper Tanaja for daily expenses needed for the Dwayne Dante's residence during his time in the southern continent. Meanwhile, he had a deeper understanding of the importance of having a butler and valet in high society. There were many things that a master couldn't keep from them, therefore, any conflict in faith and political inclinations necessitated a change. Richardson hesitated and said, "Sir, I was born in the southern continent and am fluent in Dutanese. I'm also very familiar with the various local traditions. I should be of help to you." Dutanese was a common language of the ancient Balam Empire. In present-day East and West Balam, the citizens still used this language. Only people of the middle and upper class knew foreign languages like ancient Fasak, Loanese, and Intis. Klein felt lucky with regards to this because ancient Balam was once a unified empire with a true god existing in it. Therefore, although the different states had different accents, they all used Dutanese. The written language was likewise the same. This saved him plenty of trouble. If I were to encounter dozens or more than 100 dialects and languages, that would be a headache. However, Dutanese and ancient Fasak doesn't belong to the same system. I'm unable to easily grasp the various branches by learning the latter. Finding an interpreter is necessary. Oh, Anderson seems to be fluent in Dutanese. He never seemed to mention having any problems with communication in West Balam. Klein finished listening to Richardson when he suddenly realized what was stumping him. As a valet, he needed to follow whenever his employer headed out. There was no need for a butler to do so. This also meant that a valet was like a secretary for the master's daily life. In certain cases, they would also play a role as a business secretary. Clearly, Richardson enjoyed his life in Backland and everything it had to offer. He didn't wish to return to the southern continent to see scenery or matters that would make him recall his past. Therefore, when he got into the carriage, he had tried to mention his traits but was unable to voice it out. He wished that Dwayne Dantes could find a better candidate. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "I can tell that you don't like the southern continent. Why are you telling me this?" Richardson slowly bowed his head and looked at his toes. "You gave me a chance to gain experience to mature. I believe I can help you." Very simple feelings of gratitude. If you hadn't said so, no one would know that you knew Dutanese. After all, you were born and raised in an East Balam colony manor. Klein carefully sized up Richardson, chuckled inwardly, and made some silent poignant comments. However, he didn't plan on letting this valet of his follow him to the southern continent. Firstly, it would make it inconvenient for him to carry out certain operations. Secondly, if he was recognized by some nation re-establishment society member of the numinous episcopate, it might end up affecting the rest of his life. Klein laughed and replied, "I have plenty of friends there. They're all fluent in Dutanese and are aware of the traditions there." You have more important things to do. Stay in Backland. Help me deliver some gifts to my friends at fixed periods of time. I'll be giving you a name list when the time comes. Also, read more papers and take note of investment opportunities and also perform on-the-ground checks. Finally, give me a corresponding report. I will get Ma'am Tanaja to specially prepare some funds for this. Richardson was somewhat surprised before saying in pleasant surprise, yes, sir. I will work hard. At that instant, he felt that he was being put in an important position as his eyes blurred up. From the moment he was born, this was the first time he felt hope for his future. It was something to look forward to. After dismissing Richardson, Klein took a comfortable bath to soothe his tense nerves. Then, he wore his pajamas and returned to the bedroom. Taking a pen and paper, he drew a symbol that was a mixture of concealment and mystery prying. The full-body mirror surface ripples with aqueous light. The silver light formed Loanese text. Exalted Great Master, your puny, loyal and humble servant, Aurora, is here to answer your summoning. Are you about to leave Backland again? Klein nodded and said, yes. Without waiting for Aurora to mention that he could question it, he asked, can I still contact you in the southern continent? Of course. As long as you take out that magical radio transceiver. On the surface of the mirror, silver words quickly formed. However, you cannot leave it out in the real world for too long or use it too frequently. There are plenty of beneficiaries of the Mother Tree of Desire. She can use it to detect you. Klein nodded gently and asked, what do you know about the Mother Tree of Desire? Aurora suddenly fell into silence. It was only after a very long time that its silver luster formed a complete sentence. I don't dare to mention it, nor do I dare to show it. Don't dare to mention it or show it. At least for Aurora, the Mother Tree of Desire is definitely stronger than Sequence 1's Zeridol. No, it's even stronger than the Monster Pathway's uniqueness, die of probability. There should be a way to circumvent the restriction to get Aurora to display the corresponding information, such as bringing it above the gray fog. Heh, how is that possible? That won't happen unless I'm already an angel and in complete control of that mysterious space. Klein's eyes moved slightly without pressing the question. He asked, it's your turn to ask. The full-body mirror's silver light turned brisk, forming a new sentence. Great Master, what other instructions do you have for me? Nice question. Klein thought for a moment and said, after I leave Backland, take note of Dr. Aaron Sirius's family. Once his wife gives birth, remember to mention it to me when I summon you. After careful consideration, Klein believed that leaving this matter to Aurora was for the best. After all, no one could monitor Dr. Aaron's residence 24 hours a day. And what Klein needed to do was to switch residences at the end of the month to turn on the radio transceiver once. Alright, Master, the words on the mirror reflected Aurora's mood. I have a question. Speak. Klein nodded, giving permission. This time, the sentence Aurora presented were filled with pauses as though it was very hesitant. Great Master, what relationship does that child have with you? It seemed to be puzzled why a supreme ruler above the spirit world would pay so much attention to a yet-to-be-born infant. I've already said that it's the yet-to-be-born child of Dr. Aaron Series, yet Aurora fails to notice anything special about Wuxia. When it comes to hiding his fate and special traits, a snake of fate is far better than the angels of the other sequences. However, the magic mirror is able to accurately give me the time when Tail Devourer or Ouroboros would leave Backland. It's likely that Wuxia's reboot makes it difficult for high-leveled existences to notice anything. This might also be why he can avoid the Angel of Fate. Klein answered in enlightenment, friends. About being Wuxia's godfather, it was just a casual thought. He didn't have much confidence about that or dare to force it, afraid that he would annoy the Snake of Fate. Only friends. Aurora revealed an inexplicable sense of disappointment in its words. Great Master, you can ask a question. Klein thought for a moment before saying, do you know who the person I met at the East Balam Military Veterans Mess is? If you aren't sure who I'm referring to, I can draw him for you. In the dark and deep mirror, aqueous light surfaced, producing a cold and bearded man with dark blue eyes. It was none other than the demigod Klein suspected to be of the Black Emperor pathway. Meanwhile, the corresponding text appeared beneath the picture. He's Brigadier General Konas Kilgore. He's from MI9 and is a deputy director. He's known to be a Sequence 5 from the lawyer pathway, but he wields a powerful sealed artifact. Me 9. Brigadier General. Deputy Director. From the looks of it, he's the representative of the spy network for the faction of the royal family. Klein memorized the information given to him by the magic mirror. But for a moment, he was at a loss as to the direction for the investigation. After all, Konas was a demigod, and be it spying or sounding him out, it would easily put him in an alert state regardless of whether he did it himself or commissioned someone else. It was bound to provoke revenge. The only reliable idea he had was to rely on Miss Justice to do some gathering of information. Not only was her standing high, she also had the social connections to obtain the relevant information. Furthermore, she was a Sequence 6 of the spectator pathway. She could steer topics of conversation without garnering any suspicion, allowing her to complete her observation stealthily. I have to say that, although spectators have lacking combat abilities, they are a force to be reckoned with in other aspects. Besides, with the powers of psychiatrist and hypnotist, spectators can control and guide the direction of a battle to a certain extent. Klein reflected over it as he wondered what else he could ask Rhodes about. At this moment, the light from the mirror surface faded and formed a new sentence. Great Master, do you wish to know the mastermind behind Quarren's suicide? You are even providing me intelligence on your own accord? Although I've already extricated myself from this matter, I haven't been too actively involved in it and am just awaiting the Nighthawk's investigations. I didn't even find it necessary to ask about it. Klein chuckled inwardly and nodded. Yes. The full-body mirror produced a silver line of text. Royal Family's consultant, Vin Rambus, one of the counselors of the psychology alchemists. Psychology alchemists? Royal Family's consultant? Klein immediately frowned. He found it difficult to determine what the psychology alchemists were plotting, or if a particular faction of the royal family was dissatisfied with the current political climate and was attempting to nudge it. The psychology alchemists isn't like I imagined, being focused on academics and the exploration of ancient ruins. Do all secret organizations attempt to grasp power at a certain point to influence the world? An anchor's requirement? I wonder if Vin Rambus's ploy is a personal act or decided by the organization. If it's the former, that's still alright, but if it's the latter, it will be easier for Miss Justice to encounter difficult choices as her standing in the psychology alchemists rises. Klein's thoughts whirred as he returned to the question-and-answer game. He deliberated and asked, "What else do you wish to say?" If anyone else had asked such a question, Klein believed that Rhodes would smite them with lightning or use another malicious method to tease them. However, he believed that, as a supreme ruler above the spirit world, he had the right to ask such a question. It was also an opportunity to test Rhodes's bottom line. The silver light on the full-body mirror surface transformed into another new line without any hesitation. Great Master, Amon is already in Backland as you expected. As it's his avatar that came, I can see it. What do you mean as I expected? When did I expect it? Klein pricked up his brows and said. I'm aware. All right. That's it for today. I'll summon you again using the radio transceiver if I come across any more questions. Yes, Master, your loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, is constantly awaiting your orders. Goodbye. The mirror surface depicted an emoticon of waving a handkerchief. Klein watched in silence until everything was restored to normal. On the second day, which was a Monday, he had already made preparations to head to the southern continent. Apart from the luggage that contained 2 sets of clothes, 500 pounds, and some miscellaneous clothing that was meant for show, he threw the remaining 12,125 pounds and 87 gold coins above the grey fog. The reason why he was so careful was because Klein had a deep impression on his last death and resurrection. If he hadn't had an anonymous account with a few £100 from Miss Justice, he had no idea how long he had to wander the streets. Perhaps he had to really get a job at the circus to be a clown, or he'd have to head to a certain gangster leader's place to borrow some money. Seeing that it was almost 3, Klein headed up above the grey fog, prepared to have this week's tarot gathering. He had previously done a divination here, and he received the conclusion that, unless they were in the same building, Blasphemer Amon was unable to detect a tarot club member being pulled up into the mysterious space above the grey fog. Before long, dark red beams shot up in the Grand Palace, materializing into blurry figures. Having confirmed that she was restarting her psychology lessons this week and having re-established contact with the psychology alchemists, Audrey looked towards the end of the long bronze table in a relatively good mood. She stood up, raised the corners of her skirt, and bowed. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Opposite her, the hanged man also got up and bowed, but he had another question on his mind. He had originally promised the world Gehrman Sparrow that he would give him the mystical item made from the ocean songster Beyonder characteristic last week. But to his dismay, something happened to the artisan, preventing him from handing it over in time. With regards to this, Alger planned on explaining the reason to the world at the tarot gathering before personally taking action to resolve the problems of the artisan. After the bow and exchanging greetings, Catlia was just about to say something when she saw Mr. Fool rap the edges of the model table. This dull knock made all the tarot club members tense up. They had no idea what Mr. Fool was about to say. It must be something serious. Something that's emphasized by Mr. Fool at the beginning must be something serious. Audrey determined inwardly. The Fool Klein surveyed the area and said with a smile, "Amon recently came to Backland." "An avatar. Amon? Blasphemer Amon?" Derek instantly felt his unpleasant memories become invoked. Be it parasitizing the former team captain, asking, "Are you looking for me?" or coiling around his spirit body like a snake, Amon with his pointed hat was a nightmare he couldn't shirk away from. One had to know that, as a resident of the City of Silver, Derek had seen plenty of terrifying monsters. Only a few could make him feel uneasy and fearful just from a mere recollection. Amon has headed to Backland where Miss Justice and Miss Magician are living? What does he want? What should they do? Derek suddenly felt nervous for his companions. Amon. This ancient king of angels has returned to the real world? Indeed, when a revolution is about to happen or is descending, the waves of the times will come flooding in. Alger's eyes narrowed as he recalled what Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos had once said to him. Catlia's thoughts were similar to his. As the king of angels had reappeared in the northern continent, she could catch a whiff of the unease. A phrase surfaced in her mind, the changing of an epoch. Amon. Angel of time Amon. An ancient king of angels. Audrey trembled in concern. She glanced at the magician Furs and Mr. Moon who wore blank and horrified looks and couldn't help but look towards the end of the long bronze table. Honorable Mr. Fool, can I think of a way to inform the church of this matter? Regarding Miss Justice's question, Klein had already considered it some time ago. After all, leaving troublesome problems to the official organizations who could resolve them was his modus operandi. However, Leonard's and Pallas Zorost's reaction made him realize something different. Leonard was a red glove of the Nighthawks. He could easily create an informant to pass the news of Amon being in Backland to the Church of Evernight, and then let the Archbishop and high-ranking deacons decide on a strategy before carrying out an operation. It wouldn't expose his problem, and it could also quash any latent troubles. Yet, he had chosen to leave using the excuse of a mission. It was obvious to Klein that Amon's appearance was tied to the reason for Leonard's choice of action. He had the suspicion that informing the Church of Evernight might result in unpredictable negative outcomes. Therefore, the angel of the Marauder pathway in Leonard's body had denied this choice of action. And he was one of the existences who knew the various Beyonder powers that Amon possessed. When I have no idea what to do, the choice is undoubtedly to emulate those with experience. Although there's the grey fog separating us, and any problem will cease at Miss Justice's side, there's no need to take such risks. There aren't many members of the Tarot Club to begin with. Every one of them needs to be cherished. Thoughts flashed through the Fool Klein's mind as he shook his head and said with a calm, humored tone, "Ignore him. Ignore him. Mr. Fool's attitude is as if Amon is a stray dog. In his eyes, only sequence 0 true deities are worthy of attention?" That's right. The last time the sun was possessed by Amon's avatar, Mr. Fool had easily cleansed it away. As long as Amon doesn't appear in person, it's not too big a problem for him. The reason Mr. Fool emphasized this matter at the beginning is to warn us to be careful. Alger thought in fearful respect and enlightenment. Audrey similarly interpreted the meaning that it was a trivial matter. She suddenly made the connection. Is Mr. World Gehrman Sparrow's temporary departure of Backland to avoid Angel of Time Amon? To Mr. Fool, although he is still slowly recovering his standing, level, and powers, it's not difficult for him to deal with Amon's avatar. The sun's encounter is evidence. He got his blessed to avoid Amon to not attract the Angel of Time's real body, as this can spoil his plans of awakening? Yes, he emphasized it to us as a warning, worried that we wouldn't react properly when chancing upon Amon. Mr. Fool really shows his concern for us. At this moment, Emlyn had just digested the matter of King of Angels blasphemer Amon's appearance in Backland. Although he was arrogant, repeated tarot gatherings had allowed him to understand what a King of Angels was. It was an existence second to sanguine ancestor Lilith, second to the true deities that sat at the pinnacle sequence. They were the strongest ones who walked the real world. What's going to happen this time in Backland? When the time comes, there will be dead people, the wounded, or the sick everywhere outside. I'll become busy again because of Father. Emlyn recalled his life after the great smog of Backland as he showed signs of fear that such matters would happen again. Furs also felt that the problem was significant. This was because if Angel of Time Amon really wanted to do something, it was very likely that he would inflict damage on a large scale. It was something that she could avoid by hiding at home and not heading out. She silently drew a breath and looked to the end of the long bronze table, worriedly asking, Honorable Mr. Fool, why is Amon sending his avatar to Backland? Klein deliberated over his choice of words and looked around the table with a smile. To look for all of you. To look for us? The sentence seemed to be like bolts of lightning that struck Furs and company awake. It left their spines numb. Right on the heels of that, Audrey made the connection of the reply to ignore him from before. She found Mr. Fool like the boundless ocean, and a mere avatar of blasphemer Amon was just a rock. It could only cause a tiny stir and nothing more. Although Amon's avatar came to find us tarot club members, Mr. Fool has said to ignore him, so there's no need to bother about him. Praise Mr. Fool. Audrey's nerves that had just tensed up instantly relaxed. Emlyn, Furs, and Derek also figured out something similar. They either leaned back into their seats, exhaled openly, or praised Mr. Fool from the bottom of their hearts. Katlia hadn't joined when Amon possessed the son Derek, and she had only learned of it during a few of the subsequent discussions. Therefore, she knew little and didn't have deep thoughts about it. She just felt worried over the situation where Amon, a king of angels, was seeking out the tarot club members. Why would a king of angels like Amon target the tarot club? He likely discovered our organization from the sun. What goal does he have, and why is he so confident? He is targeting Mr. Fool? He can sense the abnormalities of the gray fog? But Mr. Fool said to ignore him. This means that, under normal circumstances, Amon is unable to tell who is a tarot club member. With Kings of Angels appearing, is the fifth epoch coming to an end? After Alger relaxed from his tensed state, he began thinking about something else. Back when he informed the Church of Storms about Bansi Harbor's problem, his excuse was that he had heard someone at a bar mentioning it. And he had described this person using blasphemer Amon's image. Thankfully, even if the church were to encounter Amon, with the way they handle things, they wouldn't verify and question this matter. And regardless of Amon's performance or because of his identity, they will definitely find him extremely suspicious and place weight on this suspicion. Alger wasn't worried that he would expose himself for this trivial problem, he only believed that it was best that he should be careful and not randomly use high-ranking beyonders, especially angels and above, as scapegoats. Hence, he warned himself. Although not every high-ranking beyonder is at the level of any mention of it will be known, or have similar powers, mentioning it excessively might result in me encountering that existence due to the machinations of fate. After all, the higher one goes, the deeper the connections of fate will be. Seeing that the tarot club members, especially the three who were in Backland, had already shown signs of wariness about Amon's avatar and had written off the thoughts of being rash and not plan on targeting the blasphemer, he calmed down and leaned back, leisurely looking at everyone as an indication that the floor was theirs. Catlia reigned in her worries over the northern and southern continent and the 5 seas before looking to the seat of honor at the long bronze table. Honorable Mr. Fool, I have 3 new diary pages again this time. She remembered vividly that, at the end of last Monday's tarot gathering, she had informed the meaning of the 2 Roselian characters to Queen Mystic. However, she only received a reply on Sunday. In it were 3 new diary pages and a question of medium length. The place his mind and spirit calls home, is it on that island, or the depths of the cosmos? When Catlia ruminated over this question, she seemed to sense the emotional upheavals that were happening when Queen Mystic wrote it, unlike her usual calm self. With regards to this, she sighed silently based on her understanding of Queen Mystic Bernadette. In Her Majesty's heart, Emperor Roselle is an unresolved knot. This is the reason why she ultimately doesn't dare to advance to Sequence 2. Klein had no idea what Mam Hermit was thinking, all he did was nod and indicated that she could conjure the new Roselle diary pages. Soon, the 3 yellowish-brown goatskin pages appeared in his palm. March 10th. I participated in that ancient and most secret organization's gathering. After many observations, I'm increasingly puzzled over a problem. What does it mean to be the trend of the times? Who defines the trend of the times? If it's really as they claim, when everything ends and the original creator is resurrected from the dead, awakening from his slumber, he would gather everything back into his body to create a new world and new history. Then, there's no need for them to let the times develop according to what they expect of the times. They can quickly come up with all kinds of schemes, such as triggering a world war, a war between angels, or even a war between deities. Wouldn't that accelerate their goals? Or could it be the case that the times is part of the original creator? Only when the times develop according to a certain expectation can he draw energy from it and revive? This isn't scientific. Of course, whatever I see and participate in now isn't scientific at all. Actually, if I had any say, why revive the creator who rides above all? Everyone can just go through the motions and enjoy themselves without any restrictions. Isn't that better? Based on my observations, there are many members who share similar viewpoints as mine. However, there are a number of members who are stubborn and inflexible, strictly abiding to their beliefs. I wonder if they should be called idealists or crazy cultists. What I can't see through the most is that mysterious leader. Old Mr. Hermes told me that this organization began with him. It was organized with people who shared his beliefs and goals. However, he seldom expresses his thoughts, never stopping many of the members who use the organization for their own purposes. At times, I will even forget his existence. He seems to enjoy sitting there, silently watching everyone converse. But on one matter, I witnessed his might. A high sequence beyonder who had gone against their so-called trend of the times was put forth by him. In 30 seconds, the person became a target of elimination. And I believe that the poor fellow wouldn't survive past summer. Who is he? Some ancient god that survived the second epoch? Roselle had used 2 question marks at the end of the sentence to express his strong doubts. This was something he seldom did, hence, Klein suspected that this was the reason why Bernadette had chosen this diary entry. The mysterious leader of the Twilight Hermit Order enjoys sitting there, silently watching everyone converse. Once he wishes for something to be done, the matter can very quickly reach a consensus. This really matches the characteristics of the spectator pathway. I'm increasingly convinced that he is Amon's brother, the other son of the creator, Adam. In his later years, the Emperor learned plenty of secrets from Mr. Dorr and was probably able to come up with similar conclusions. As Klein compared the descriptions in the diary with what he already knew to come up with theories and verify them, he cast his gaze down to read the rest of the content of the page. March 11th. The more I recall what happened yesterday, the more afraid I am. A demigod existence had his fate decided with just a few words. He didn't even have the chance to express his disapproval. And the makeup of the ancient secret organization convinces me that, apart from dealing with the 7 Orthodox churches, there is nothing that they can't do. Even the toppling of a nation isn't impossible. How lucky I am to be pulled into this organization, otherwise, who knows if I might one day suffer an unexpected assassination I cannot resist. I'll die with my eyes wide open. This kind of organization that hides behind the scenes, secretly passing judgment on others, while determining the life and death of the target is really unacceptable. Even if I'm one of their members, I'm still appalled and feel fear deep down. This world is so much more dangerous than Earth. Perhaps just being born with relatively high spirituality, randomly flipping through an ancient tome, sitting normally on a ship doing business, taking in the beauty of some lady, entering some castle because of one's love of traveling, being woken up by fighting next door in the middle of the night, or creating something that's of meaning, these would be enough to cause one to die a baffling, tragic death. And this is one of the reasons that drive me to improve myself, to advance myself, to gain the ability to determine my own fate. I can definitely succeed. I'm the protagonist of this era, ha. March 12th. I feel there's a need to seek out some material regarding the 4th epic, 3rd epic, and even the 2nd epic. The experience that came from joining that ancient secret organization tells me that there might be countless secrets hidden here, the kind that will influence the direction of an epic. Unfortunately, such information is astonishingly rare. They're either kept by the church, or they have been destroyed. I believe that I'm unlikely to gain much simply by relying on my subordinates. The best method is still to raise my sequence. It will allow me to gain a higher status and greater power in the church. From this diary page, it's obvious that the Emperor's act of establishing contact with Mr. Dorr had happened very long after he joined the Twilight Hermit Order. Perhaps he was already a high sequence beyonder, otherwise, there was no way he could withstand Mr. Dorr's ravings. Compared to the Emperor, it's so much easier for me to investigate history. I have his diary for the 4th epic. There's the City of Silver for the 2nd epic. From time to time, I can even encounter the evil spirit that was formed by a king of angels. In the middle of his life, the Emperor seems to tone down on his illusions of grandeur. Klein flipped to the 2nd diary page with a relaxed attitude. May 18th. I've been having nightmares recently. I dream of myself wearing ancient silver-gray armor and sitting beside a cliff. In front of me is silence, and there's a bottomless black fog beneath me. It was filled with corruption and evil. Merely looking at it was enough to influence me. Towards the end, my face grew complicated, jet-black patterns as I monitored the abyss. My skin turned hard and I had the feeling that sticky liquid was flowing across the surface of my body. My eyes completely lost their reason. It was a reflection of the abyss. It was the reflection of the abyss which I saw and attempted to enter last month. As this nightmare becomes more frequent, I realize that extreme thoughts are becoming a common occurrence for me. Occasionally, the anger from being beaten up might lead me to hoping to rip apart the limbs of my target. Also, dark red lumps are growing on my back. My body temperature is also gradually decreasing. Is this a form of corruption from the abyss? I have to think of a way to confirm and resolve it. For the time being, I cannot get the church's help, otherwise, I'll have to divulge the existence of the primitive island and the abyss. Yes, I can find the priests and bishops of the Eternal Blazing Sunday. They're more skilled at purification. May 19th. Through some connections, I received some secret treatment. My entire being felt a lot more relaxed. All the anomalies that happened to me have turned for the better. Amidst my joy, I also thought of a problem. I had only explored the periphery of the abyss, without making contact with any high-level devils. I even had an object on the Black King that could resist corruption, yet, I was affected without realizing it and even had signs of being corrupted. Those criminal pathway beyonders would make sacrifices to high-level devils from time to time, the corruption they suffer must be even worse. Over time, it's probably untreatable, and they can only be cleansed, both body and aura. Likewise, high-sequence beyonders, especially angels, should be able to exert influence on low and mid-sequence beyonders of the same pathway. And due to the difference in level, there are corresponding limitations on distance. When one becomes a true god, there's a high probability that they can communicate across the whole world and spirit world without any obstructions. This begs the question: am I being influenced to a certain extent by the god of craftsmanship? No, should I say the god of steam and machinery? This is quite scary. It appears that only by becoming a demigod that I will be able to escape this influence. Thankfully, since the 5th epoch, there hasn't been any examples of true gods leaving the astral world to descend upon the land. Likewise, pathways without true gods do not have such severe problems. May 20th. After a period of being dispirited, I've returned to the social scene. *CK, those bastards have been secretly mocking me, saying that the reason for me not coming out recently has to do with me having too much fun and turning weak. Just because my dark eye circles are more obvious because of my nightmare-induced poor sleep quality? Hee, I want to let them know what it means by the difference in one's talent. I wonder what an angel's influence is like on a low or mid-sequence beyonder. The transmission of ravings over great distances? Automatic characteristic attraction? Regardless of where it is, as long as one's honorific name is chanted, one will have the godhood to reply. When meeting each other, is it the direct acquisition and erosion of one's beyonder characteristic? If all of this is possible, it's equivalent to a mini-deity. It's no wonder that angels in the 2nd epoch are called subsidiary gods. Klein's thoughts raced as he flipped the page in his hand to read the last diary page. October 12th. Edwards ran to me, telling me that one of his knights discovered a strange chapel. It might have to do with the faith before the 4th epoch. This piqued my interest as I immediately rushed to the tiny city by the name of Bayman. October 13th. Bayman is a tiny town built on a mountain. The buildings all have protruded domes, just like a white straw hat. It's very special. Following the street, and covering several flights of stairs, I finally found the strange chapel. On the surface, it looked like an ordinary residence with nothing special about it. Only by entering would one discover the difference. There was only one priest here. He was a genial middle-aged man who wore a simple white robe. He had a pale gold beard that covered half his face. His light-colored eyes were clear like a child's. He claimed the place to be a temple of the Creator. Any creature from any species, any believer of any deity could enter. When I heard him mention this, it reminded me of a question I had. Apart from the 7 orthodox deities, the other faiths are deemed as heretics. They are unable to openly build a cathedral other than that of the original Creator. However, there has never been any such church coming into existence. Even cathedrals are extremely rare. In front of the chapel was a simple baldachin. In it was a man carrying a cross. This was likely the divine image of the so-called Creator. I sat in the front pew and idly chatted with the priest. He told me of many different stories. He said that when humans were first born, the ones that ruled the skies, land, and sea were all sorts of crazy, bloodthirsty monsters. They were said to be the origins of the later species, dragons, giants, and elves. These monsters freely indulged in their desires, occupying all kinds of places. It appeared that it wouldn't take long before they destroyed the entire world. At this moment, it was the Creator who had awoken. He retrieved the special traits and powers that they had been blessed with, and he had bestowed it to the humans. After that, he returned to his slumber, leaving behind a prophecy. When madness, cruelty, greed, indulgence, coldness, and bloodthirstiness drowns the land once again, he would awaken and retrieve everything. As we spoke, the priest held the hanging cross by his chest and silently prayed. Such a myth is completely different from the Church's canon. There are many interesting parts that are worth thinking about. October 15th. I've been back in Trier for a day. Only then did I forget to ask the priest for his name. Forget it. There will still be a chance in the future. My sixth sense as a man tells me that I'll definitely head to that chapel again. Isn't this the condensed version of the City of Silver's myth? The period around the end of the 2nd epoch and the beginning of the 3rd epoch. That priest seems to know a lot. Perhaps an organization that passes down such a myth over the generations know a lot. Klein's mind stirred as the diary pages in his hand vanished. Then, he looked up at Ma'am Hermit. Go ahead. Catlia immediately bowed her head. Honorable Mr. Fool, what I wish to know is if the place that Emperor Rosel's mind and spirit calls home on that island or the depths of the cosmos. That island? That primitive island that caused Grimm to die and had left the Emperor shocked? From the looks of it, the Emperor treated the island with great importance towards the end of his life. Even Queen Mystic Bernadette noticed it. What does deep in the cosmos mean? The astral world? Or some other planet? There are many things about the Emperor that transcends his era, so he's suspected by his daughter to be an alien? Although it's a little ridiculous, it adheres to logic. After all, research has proven that this is a planet. The sun is a star, and apart from that is the endless universe, a galaxy with countless stars. How should I answer? I can't just tell her about transmigration. But it's not like I can't say anything. Klein pondered for a while before shaking his head with a smile. Neither of them. Neither of them. Catlia ruminated over Mr. Fool's reply, suddenly feeling at a loss as to the true meaning of the question. She originally imagined that the place that Emperor Rosel's mind and spirit called home had to involve something philosophical or mystical. For example, the island might refer to the divine kingdom of the deity of his faith, the depths of the cosmos referred to the astral world, indicating Emperor Rosel's belief in surpassing himself in his quest for a deity's throne. In the end, Mr. Fool answered that it was neither. This denied nearly every possibility, making it difficult for her to think of any other answer. Perhaps what Her Majesty wishes to ask is not something I understand. What Mr. Fool is saying is pointing at another explanation. It doesn't matter if I understand it. I'm only a communication tool between them. Catlia sighed inwardly as she sincerely bowed. Thank you for your answer. The other Tarot Club members were lost in regards to the question and answer. Although they could understand the reason for the question and could understand what the actual meaning of the mental and spiritual home was, they couldn't make any connection to the island or the depths of the cosmos. Hence, all of them had their own interpretations and guesses, but all of them felt that their theories were distant from the truth. Subconsciously, Furs believed that the island referred to the woman Rosel loved the most. The depths of the cosmos referred to the Emperor's late years when he cast his gaze to what he deemed the sea of stars. Audrey believed that the island referred to one's island of self-consciousness and psychology. The sea was the conscious, and below the sea's surface was the subconscious. And the cosmos referred to the spirituality sky that represented the astral world. Hence, the corresponding question became, did Emperor Rosel believe in himself, deities, or purely nature? From this angle, Mr. Fool's answer appeared rather strange. It was as though he was saying that Emperor Rosel didn't believe in anything, including himself. I might be misinterpreting it. But if that's really the case, Emperor Rosel might seem conflicted based on what Mr. Fool says, but in fact, it might conceal a deeper secret. Or it could be that, in his later years, he had seen through life. He began thinking about the universe, the world, deities, and the basic qualities of humanity. He became a pessimist and a nihilist? Audrey seemed to be training her abilities as she thought with piqued interest. Alger had similar thoughts as Catlia. As for Emlyn, he considered it for a moment before decisively giving up upon realizing that he had no clue. Derek had no interest in Emperor Rosel, but he didn't break the silence. He kept considering the conversations he was to have later. Finally, the fool, who was cloaked by the gray fog, chuckled and said, "You may begin." Alger immediately looked at the world and deliberated over his words. "Sorry, your mystical item will require a little more time." Without waiting for him to speak, he quickly gave an explanation. That artisan had strangely gotten infected by a sickness, and there are suspicious snoopers appearing in the vicinity. This resulted in a delay. I will personally make a trip to see if I can resolve his problems so that he can quickly recover. We'll try to make the mystical item you need within 2 weeks. He spoke extremely sincerely as a way to express his apologies and importance on the matter. But in his actual description, he had secretly pushed all the blame to the artisan. It was as though he was saying to the world that if he were displeased, I will teach him a lesson for you. If that's not enough, I will even give you his exact location for you to personally pay him a visit. That artisan sure is troublesome. Mr. Hanged Man treats this quite seriously. Non-official, or should I say artisans who are willing to accept orders from unknown origins, are extremely rare. If they can be secured, it's best that they are secured. Klein pondered for a moment and got the world to hoarsely reply, I will allow this delay, but there shouldn't be a next time. He spoke very calmly, but it alarmed Alger. He could almost feel the hidden murderous intent in the world Gehrman Sparrow. Thank you for your understanding, he said with a staid expression. Upon hearing their conversation, Katlia looked at the hanged man, curled her lips, and nudged her glasses. She said, if you are unable to resolve the problems, I can provide some help. From her point of view, as long as the problem wasn't serious, she could even do it for free. After all, this meant that she could skip the hanged man and directly establish connections with the artisan. Alger obviously sensed the true intent of this pirate admiral. He felt that she was beginning to severely encroach into his territory, giving him a certain level of pressure. He paused for a moment and replied in an unperturbed manner, then, I will thank you on his behalf for your kindness. On the one hand, he expressed his close ties with the artisan, and on the other hand, didn't directly object to her help, thus, giving him sufficient leeway. Compared to having Gehrman Sparrow find fault with him, sacrificing some benefits wasn't something unacceptable. Katlia didn't harp on the matter as she turned to look at the world. Are you pleased with the information on West Balam? She had already gathered all the information on West Balam that Gehrman Sparrow needed last Thursday. She had handed it to him via the strange messenger. She was filled with fear when it came to Mr. Fool, so given any other methods, she was unwilling to disturb that existence. It cost me a total of £300. If it wasn't good enough, I would have asked for a refund there and then. Klein mumbled and made the world answer tersely as an affirmation. Then, the fake person cast its gaze on Miss Magician. Furs immediately felt uncomfortable, akin to the feeling of a rat being targeted by a cat. She couldn't help but consider if she had done something wrong. Could it be that during my conversation with Zio, my description, defamation of Dwayne Dantes, was heard by him? Or is he displeased that I didn't refund him the money? Furs stopped thinking about the bodyguard mission that had happened days ago as she asked, quaking with consternation, Mr. World, is there something? The world nodded and said, a commission. Get information on Calderon City from the Abraham family. Most important of all is its location. Calderon City. Why is the world suddenly searching for this mysterious spirit world city? An instruction from Mr. Fool? It's a new part of his reawakening plans? Katlia had some idea about Calderon City, so she was quite perplexed. The other Tarot Club members, including Furs, didn't know what city the world was looking for. All they could do was maintain their silence. Among them, Emlyn felt that he had heard of it before, but he couldn't recall the exact details. About 4 seconds later, Furs forced a smile. No problem. I can help you ask. How much would it cost? The world asked in an unperturbed tone. £1,000. No, £500, no, I still need to deduct the bodyguard fee. Furs's mind raced and finally gave her price. £350. That's cheap. Other than the Spirit World 7 lights, perhaps only the Abraham family has detailed information on Calderon City. Yes, to Miss Magician, it's just about asking her teacher. It's indeed simple and convenient. It's no wonder it's not expensive. Klein was first surprised before coming to a realization. He made the world nod and say, deal. After watching this transaction close, Audrey noticed something amusing. Miss Magician seems to be very afraid of Mr. World. It was to the point of being a reflex. She had previously met Dwayne Dantes, but didn't know that he was Gehrman Sparrow. During this period, she discovered something terrifying. I'll arrange to meet her and Zio at Glaine's place. Let's see if I can figure out something. Audrey thought as she indiscernibly nodded. At this moment, seeing that the world had nothing else, Emlyn hurriedly looked at the sun. Do you have the sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic of the artificial vampire? I haven't accrued enough merit points. Derek didn't feel ashamed this time. On the contrary, he felt that Mr. Moon was being overly anxious. How could the points needed for a sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic be so easily amassed? Emlyn turned his head disgruntledly when he suddenly recalled something. He hurriedly said to Miss Magician, I have clues to the cursed item and remnant spirituality from an ancient wraith. I'm waiting for more detailed information. This might not be an item to give to you directly, but one to provide you with some information about where you can find an ancient wraith in the vicinity of Backland. Upon saying that, Emlyn thought and said, 300 pounds. This means that I have to hunt the ancient wraith myself? Based on various mysticism rumors, this is quite a powerful monster. After hearing what Mr. Moon had to say, Furza's first reaction was that it was a dilemma. Her second reaction was to commission the hunting mission to Mr. World. She was certain that he could quickly and successfully complete it. But upon the thought that hiring Mr. World might cost far more than what the ancient wraith was worth, she felt that it was better to attempt it herself. I'll wait until Zio becomes an interrogator. Together, we should have a higher chance. Besides, I still have Lamino's travels with me. On it is a demigod-level high sequence Beyonder power and Angel's Embrace. There are plenty of unique Beyonder powers in it, and below that of high sequence Beyonders, it's practically a divine artifact. I have little actual combat experience since I'm fleeing most of the time. This is an opportunity. Furz quickly made a decision and said to the Moon Emlyn, deal. After confirming some other matters, the transaction segment came to an end. Klein got the World Gehrman Sparrow to beat Mr. Hanged Man to the punch by looking around and saying, my preliminary investigations regarding Backland's Quarren's suicide has borne fruit. The one that was most interested Quarren's suicide was none other than Justice Audrey. However, she had long noticed that Furz had some slight interest in the case. Hence, she didn't ask and had maintained her posture, patiently waiting for a particular best-selling author to pose the question. In just a second or two, Furz looked at the borders of the table in front of the World and asked after some deliberation, what's the truth? Klein had already rehearsed how he was to describe it, so without any hesitation, he got the World to say, the mastermind behind it is the royal family's consultant, Vin Rambus. He probably has another identity, a counselor of the psychology alchemists. When she heard the first sentence, Audrey's mind had already naturally produced the image of a genial elder. This man came from an aristocratic background. He had graduated from Birth University and possessed profound knowledge and outstanding insight. He had been a consultant to the royal family for more than a decade and was publicly recognized as a scholar, a good man, a gentleman. Audrey had previously suspected that Quarren's suicide might have been instigated by the royal family, but she never expected the mastermind to be the genial, amiable, kind, and humorous Vin Rambus. When the World announced the other identity of the man, she found herself unable to hide her alarm and puzzlement. Vin Rambus is a Beyonder? He's a counselor of the psychology alchemists? This also means that he might be a demigod. I've seen him so many times, but I've never connected him to the mysterious world. I always found him to be solely a scholar, a knowledgeable scholar. If Mr. World wasn't misled in his investigations, I'd really find it unbelievable. That Vin Rambus, who's known to be helpful to others, would treat a life with such coldness. He coldly made a child lose his father, a wife to lose her husband, parents to lose their son. He usually presents himself to be cultured and loving. Politics is dirtier than I imagined. Same for the royal family. Speaking of which, I have yet to meet a counselor of the psychology alchemists. I've never made contact with their upper echelons. I never expected that this secret organization is almost no different from the cults like the Aurora Order and Numinous Episcopate. Our tarot club is better. Mr. Fool is always stopping or disrupting the plans of the evil gods and devils. While Audrey's mind was in chaos, Alger acutely sensed the brewing problems in Backland's political climate. He felt that various factions were interlinked and that there were many secrets. They formed a massive bucket of explosives that could explode at any time. The nobles, royal family, Church of Storms, Church of Evernight, Church of Steam, the burgeoning rich, the commoners who live on a precipice, and the lowest class who live abject lives. The revolution of the times is so obvious. To think I didn't recognize this at all. I just simply believed Kalangos's words and the evidence he showed. An epoch where the old gods fade and new gods arise is about to descend. The tides of history are roaring in an unstoppable manner. Alger silently sighed, seemingly seeing the tall Gothic bell tower and the bell of order that hung in it. And surrounding this famous landmark, swirls of air was materializing and the light was darkening. It appeared that eddies were gearing up to form hurricanes. Suddenly, Alger had a theory. What arises might not be a new god, but an ancient god from an even more remote age. He instinctively glanced at the seat of honor at the end of the long bronze table before quickly retracting his gaze. He could hardly quell the upheavals in his heart. At that moment, he had a baffling feeling that his ambition and goals were too puny. He had only wanted to become an archbishop of the Church of Storms, a saint. In this position, he would have authority in the world and he could direct many things in secret. Since the old gods are fading away and new gods are rising, Mr. Fool will be returning to his throne in the astral world. Then why shouldn't I consider being an angel? Only at this level can I complete a qualitative change in my existence. I'll be able to live a long lifespan. Only then can I lord over people and lead a large-scale organization. I'll wield authority over the world. As thoughts flashed through his mind, Alger trembled in an almost indiscernible manner. His heart was spewing with agitated emotions. When Catlia connected Queen Mystic's whereabouts for the past 2 months, she felt that the latter had been spending a large portion of her time in Backland. Is something about to happen in Backland? I can try asking when I write this time. I wonder what response Her Majesty will give. Catlia nudged her heavy glasses on her nose and swept her gaze across Miss Justice and the other members from Backland. Furs knew some of the details of Quarren's suicide case. She knew that the victim had acted on his own the entire time and that he wasn't controlled. She also knew that the witnesses believed without a doubt that everything was a result of Dwayne Dante's. Comparing this with the actual situation had induced a deep sense of fear towards the counselor of the psychology alchemists. She didn't wish that she would one day find out that her thoughts and hobbies were all a result of someone else's doing. How is this different from being a puppet? A high-sequence beyonder of the spectator pathway is terrifying. However, this is really good writing material. Currently, the science of psychology already has hypnosis. In my next book, I want to write about a sick girl liking a gentleman. She uses hypnosis to make him fall in love with her. The ending climax is when she discovers that the gentleman is actually a master hypnotist. Furs gaped her mouth before closing it again. She didn't ask further about Vin Rambus since she didn't know him at all. Klein's sharing of Vin Rambus was mainly to warn Miss Justice. He wanted her to be careful and wary of this psychology alchemist's counselor. Now, seeing that his goal had been achieved, he said, "There's another matter. Help me take note of Brigadier General Conas Kilgore. He's the deputy director of MI9. On the surface, he's only a Sequence 5, but in actual fact, he's a Black Emperor pathway demigod. He possesses rather potent spiritual perception and can sharply detect that others are observing him." Conas Kilgore. Audrey repeated this name inwardly and realized that she had no impression of this gentleman. Either we have little overlap in our social circles, to the point of just nodding at each other when bumping into one another without asking who the other is, or he keeps an extremely low profile. He doesn't attend such gatherings often. If I have a chance, I should ask Kantz. He's from MI9. He definitely knows the superior of his. Audrey was no longer surprised that Conas was a demigod despite being a Sequence 5 in name. From her point of view, it was common for members of an intelligence agency to be in such situations. Alger and Catlia had more or less heard of the high-ranking member of MI9, Conas Kilgore. However, they lacked a deeper understanding of the matter, so all they could do was refresh whatever they knew and remind themselves to be especially careful when encountering anything to do with the person in question. Seeing that Mr. World had nothing else to share, Derek didn't wait for Mr. Hanged Man to ask. He said, "I've made a new friend again." He paused for a moment before getting to the crux of the matter. The area he patrols includes the former chief's mausoleum. He told me that the 6-member council has yet to open the door that leads underground. However, through the cracks on the outer rocks of the mausoleum, there are luxuriant and strange plants growing out from them. They look like human hair. The 6-member council has 3 demigods. Even if there are some out on expeditions and aren't in the City of Silver, the other 3 likely control a certain powerful sealed artifact or have grazed an evil spirit, giving them nearly demigod strength. Despite joining forces for so many days, they haven't managed to open the entrance to the former chief's mausoleum. This means that it's quite a serious problem. Also, what's the reason for plants that resemble human hair to suddenly grow? One question after another arose in Klein's mind as he waited for the Hanged Man to ask Little Sun. He knew that the former would definitely have questions. Alger, who finished listening quietly, frowned slightly before relaxing his brows. After some deliberation, he said, "Apart from that, are there any anomalies? Is the one in charge of opening the mausoleum that Shepherd Elder Lovia?" "It's not her. The chief is present too." "Likewise for 2 other elders," Derek answered seriously. "There aren't any other anomalies for the time being." Alger nodded and said, "Very good. Maintain your present state. Establish communications with more people. Keep a note of any changes with that mausoleum." After being praised, Derek hurriedly nodded as he answered eagerly. After a few more exchanges of words, the gathering naturally began the learning segment. Furs had planned on asking what the pharaoh mummy was for, but after seeing the world, she shut her mouth. When the gathering ended, Klein, who had returned to the real world, turned on the tap and washed his face and hands before patiently waiting for night to come. When the time came, he would be riding on a military airship to Desi Bay. Southern continent, Barents Harbor. As the Golden Dream was cruising south in the Fog Sea, Danitz only took a few days to arrive at the harbor northmost of West Balam. He draped himself with a dark-colored cloak and carried a suitcase. Wearing the sun brooch inside his clothes, he carried an iron-black boxing glove close to his chest. He was walking down the harbor's roads and was out while sweating profusely. He felt that he was already armed to the teeth, far stronger than he was before. Once out the harbor, Danitz glanced to his sides and extended his hand to stop a carriage. When the carriage driver saw him, he set out a string of words. #@ at and. What is he saying? Danitz looked blankly at him. It took him a few seconds to recall one thing. He didn't know the local language, Dutanese, at all. And back when he came to West Balam, he had his captain, a polyglot, leading the crew. He didn't need to worry that he didn't understand anything. Danitz turned agape as he subconsciously said in Intis, "Hotel." The air seemed to instantly freeze as Danitz looked at the carriage driver's dark brown skin, coarse and messy black hair, rather soft facial contours, and blank expression. He exhaled silently and blamed it on his bad luck before silently carrying his luggage to walk down the street. T. I actually encountered a carriage driver who doesn't know Intis. Shouldn't someone who picks up passengers near the harbor know a few northern continent languages? There are so many people from Intis, Lone, and Fasak around here. As Danitz grumbled, he looked ahead to look for pedestrians who looked to be from the northern continent or had similar heritages in a bid to smoothen his process of checking into a hotel and filling his stomach. According to what he knew, Barents Harbor had quite a number of people from Intis, Lone, Fainapotter, and Fasak who had migrated here. As long as he met one, communication wouldn't be a problem. However, Danitz felt that all of this was built on a premise: he had to ensure that he didn't collapse from heatstroke. This *T weather. He looked up at the azure blue sky, white clouds, and the sun which wasn't too glaring. Cursing with a warped expression, he raised his hand to wipe the sweat from his forehead. Despite his cursing, Danitz actually knew that the temperature in the southern continent was considered mild to the point that even calling it slightly cool wasn't an exaggeration. The reason why he was feeling so hot was because he was wearing the sun brooch. However, having just arrived and having not figured out the situation in his surroundings, he didn't dare remove the brooch to stuff it into his luggage bag. If he were to lose the item, he could imagine the cold and crazy look Gehrman Sparrow would give him. Come on, give me a few people from the northern continent. Any country would do. I'm a famous pirate who knows several languages after all. Danitz kept muttering under his breath as all he could think of was iced beer and icebergs that floated in the ocean. As he muttered, he suddenly rubbed his eyes. He had finally seen someone who was clearly of northern continent descent. Furthermore, it seemed to be someone familiar. Diagonally ahead of Danitz, at a street illuminated by bright sunlight, a young man with blonde short hair that was split 70-30 was leaning against a wall, blowing into a silver harmonica. He had emerald green eyes, and he wore a white shirt that didn't have the top 2 buttons buttoned up. He wore a completely unbuttoned black vest, dark-colored trousers, and a single black glove. He was none other than the strongest hunter of the Fog Sea, Anderson Hood. What a coincidence. This fellow actually came to West Balam. Danitz felt delighted deep down, feeling that he had finally grabbed a floating plank in the sea of people. Ignoring Anderson's actions on the Golden Dream, he approached him and greeted in standard hunter speech. What happened? Treasure hunting hasn't been working out for you, so you've begun busking on the streets? He noticed that Anderson had an overturned hat in front of him. In it were about 20 to 30 brass coins. A few of them were Intis Kopets, with the majority being local Dalexi. In Intis, Dalexi meant copper coins. Anderson stopped playing the harmonica as he shot Danitz a glance. That's not my hat. I happened to walk past and saw a hat on the ground. Seeing how no one discovered it, I felt a little wistful and took out my harmonica to play it. To my surprise, quite a number of people gathered around to listen and threw money in it. A boorish pirate like you probably doesn't understand the beauty of music and how it has no borders. I'm telling you, your captain especially likes. Stop. Danitz's forehead throbbed as he stopped Anderson from diverting the topic of conversation. He asked, "Why are you here?" Anderson held the harmonica and thought about it seriously. That's a good question. I have no idea why I'm here in West Balam either. I don't remember a thing that has happened over the past 2 months. Danitz originally wanted him to cut it out, but Anderson's serious expression convinced him. He deliberated and asked, "You don't remember a thing?" Anderson put away the silver harmonica, bent down, picked up the hat with quite a number of coins, and dusted it. My last memory was of me in Byam with Gehrman Sparrow. After going our separate ways, I had apparently gone somewhere to meet someone. When I woke up, I was already here in West Byam. Haha, don't be concerned over such matters. As long as I'm still alive. Ah, it's almost noon. Let's go have a meal. I heard that Barron's is famous for its pork knuckles. While saying that, Anderson placed the hat along with the coins beside a tramp to his side. Already hot, hungry, and exhausted, Danitz was invigorated upon hearing that. You know Dutanese? Anderson chuckled. Haven't you heard of my numerous adventures as a treasure hunter in West Balam? That's right. I had thought of seeking you out to get information on West Balam. The situation here is chaotic, and it's rather dangerous. I'll definitely be safer with Anderson around. Also, I'll have an interpreter. I can't say I'm hiring him, as I can't afford him. Danitz slowly revealed a smile. That puts me at ease. Let's go. Holding his luggage, he and Anderson circled to a nearby main street and found a restaurant. Upon hearing the waiter speak in his native tongue, and seeing the menu filled with indecipherable text, Danitz felt a headache as he hurriedly said to Anderson, "I'll leave it to you." As he spoke, he handed the menu to the strongest hunter of the Fog Sea. Anderson didn't reach out his hand as he replied with a composed expression, "I can't read it either." Didn't you say you know Dutanese? Danitz blurted out in surprise. Anderson threw up his hands. I didn't say that. What has my repeated visits to West Balam in search of treasure have to do with knowing Dutanese? Without knowing Dutanese, how are you able to understand those texts in the ancient temples and castle ruins? How do you seek out treasure? Danet's expression contorted bit by bit as his tone sped up without him realizing it. Anderson picked up the cup served by the waiter and gulped it down. Problems that can be solved with a dictionary aren't problems. Besides, does not knowing Dutanese mean that you can't communicate with the people from the southern continent? With that said, he turned to look at the waiter. Speaking in the Intis language, he said, 2 specialty pork knuckles. The waiter obviously gave him a blank look as he kept pointing at the menu. Anderson didn't fluster at all as he unhurriedly pressed his right hand to his nose and mimicked the grunting of a pig. The waiter was first taken aback before revealing a look of enlightenment. Then, Anderson pointed at his knuckles and pointed at the Baron's label on the menu before using his fingers to show $2 $. As the waiter spoke in an accented Dutanese, he repeatedly nodded to show his comprehension. By the side, Danetz was dumbfounded by what he saw. After a series of gestures, mixed with a few basic Dutanese words, he finally finished ordering the meal. Turning his head to Danetz, he smiled. Get it? In this world, there's a common language, body language. Danetz watched with a frozen expression as he curled the corners of his lips as a response. A carriage drove out of West Borough, and it headed south at an intersection. Soon, it arrived at a military base. With Colonel Calvin's letter and a junior officer escorting him, Klein successfully entered the base and arrived at a square paved with rammed earth. Berthed on it was a dark blue and white behemoth. This airship was dozens of meters long, and its truss had solid and light composite metal frames extended from it. They were intercrossed with one another as they held up an impermeable cloth used as cushions. Beneath it were openings mounted with machine guns, projectile launchers, and cannons. At this moment, the ignition steam engine had yet to hum, and the corresponding propellers were still static. Everything appeared extremely silent. Klein handed his documents and proof of identity to the officer on guard by the gangway. After receiving permission, he walked up onto the airship with his suitcase in hand. It was like a ship with 3 sections. The uppermost section had complicated machinery and a cargo hall. The middle section had a hall for buffets and balls. Surrounding the hall were hallways that led to the upper and lower sections. These hallways included lounges. As for the lowest section, they were the rooms for the machine guns, projectile launchers, and cannons, as well as the soldiers' cabins. Walking by the guards equipped with rifles, Klein followed the instructions he received from the officer and found the lounge reserved for him. He placed his luggage beside a sofa-like chair. Then, he picked up a cup of water on the table, walked to the window, and took in the scenery outside. To be frank, although he knew a little of everything, it was really only a little. Therefore, he didn't understand the design principles used for this new airship model. He didn't know how high it could go or how stable it was in midair. This left him a little uneasy. Before setting off, he had even done a divination above the gray fog. He received a revelation that he would arrive at his destination rather smoothly. There seems to be a safety belt. This world's airship industry has plenty of years of history. They have quite a bit of experience accumulated in all aspects. Klein was just about to retract his gaze and admire the decorations inside the room and the candlelight when he noticed a group of people approaching Airship 1345. They were men and women, all of them wearing thin, black trench coats and red gloves. They were carrying leather suitcases of varying sizes. Only one of them wore a mysterious medium's robe. She had blue eyeshadow and blush, and she was none other than Daly Simone. And behind the lady was the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell. While no one noticed it, Leonard's footsteps suddenly slowed down. Then, he looked up at the midsection of the airship. His eyes reflected the gray-sideburned and blue-eyed Dwayne Dantes, who was wearing a suit and bow tie. This gentleman was standing behind a window, revealing a genial smile as he raised the cup in his hand. Leonard's expression froze for a moment before he composed himself. He had already remembered that Dwayne Dantes was working with the military and was preparing to sell a batch of firearms and cannons to West Balam. Therefore, even though it was surprising to see this gentleman appear on a military airship, it wasn't jarring in any way. The only issue is why he's heading to West Balam so quickly. Amon's arrival has also exerted some pressure on him? Leonard's mind raced as he leveled his gaze and walked up the gangway with his teammates to the midsection and entered a huge lounge reserved for them. Not long after the red gloves took their seats, a deep hum sounded. The rotating of the propeller and all kinds of frictional sounds were heard. It caused the floorboards and walls to gently shake. As the tremors increased in intensity, it turned into a wobbling motion as the airship rose up and slowly regained its stability. Klein had already sat down and buckled his seatbelt. He was looking at his surroundings out of curiosity as he experienced a different form of flight. The takeoff isn't too stable. The altitude is also rather low, but without encountering any hurricanes, the tremors are still alright. I wonder how it was done. Klein looked diagonally at the windows ahead without any intention of unbuckling his seatbelt or walking around. This wasn't acrophobia even if he had a mild fear of heights. This was because he was briefly wearing creeping hunger and had the ability of short-distance flight and teleport. He was only seriously acting like a Desi tycoon who was riding on an airship for the first time. At this moment, Klein's spiritual perception was triggered. He hurriedly clicked his teeth and activated spirit vision. He saw the colors around him saturate as they clearly stacked upon one another. He saw bones spew out from the floor, gushing out like a fountain in midair, forming a giant skeleton that was nearly 4 meters tall. This skeleton's eye sockets were burning with dark flames. Its arms were hanging down, holding a folded letter. Mr. Azek's messenger. He has finally recovered from his state of metamorphosis? Klein was pleasantly surprised as he tried to stand up to receive the letter. But when he felt a force pulling him back at his abdomen, he recalled that had his seatbelt buckled. When he reached out to unbuckle it, the skeleton messenger crouched down and stuffed the letter into his hands. Klein was taken aback as he looked up into the eye sockets which were burning with pitch-black flames. He nodded gently as form of gratitude. He could understand why the messenger didn't appear from the section below, allowing half his body to tear through the floorboard, as this was a military airship. Apart from the red gloves, there were probably other Beyonders. They also had spiritual perceptions and different levels of spirit vision. They could also barely sense the messenger's existence. But I don't think that delivering a letter in such a crouched manner is being polite. I'd rather it did what it used to. Klein mumbled and saw the skeleton messenger crumble into illusory bones, gushing down like a waterfall. In the huge lounge, Daly Simone, who still enjoyed being called a spirit medium, suddenly turned her head and looked at the room across the hall. Her brows furrowed slightly as her eyes narrowed. Daly immediately retracted her gaze and said to the low-ranking officer in the corner of the lounge who was acting as a waiter, "Make me a cocktail. Black Rand and champagne. Half each." "That's a very strange mixture, ma'am." As the officer unbuckled his seatbelt, he walked to the bar that was welded to the ground as he attempted to offer a suggestion. Daly with her blue eyeshadow and blush said with a smile, "I enjoy unique tastes." Upon saying that, she casually asked, "Is there anyone else on this airship besides the military officers and us?" The officer answered while opening the bar's cabinet, "Yes. A merchant. Apparently, his name is Dwayne Dantes. He is working with the Ministry of Defense." Dwayne Dantes. Daly was taken aback as she turned her eyes slightly away and asked, "What kind of work?" To her right, Leonard Mitchell had subconsciously changed his seating posture. He switched from crossing his right leg over his left to his left over his right. "I'm not sure," the officer answered with a shake of the head. "Apparently it has something to do with using the gentleman's experience in the southern continent." Southern continent. Daly repeated the word in thought and stopped asking. In the small lounge opposite, Klein had already unfolded the letter to read it seriously. It was indeed from Azek Eggers. He indicated that his previous experiences had allowed him to retrieve more of his memories. He had no choice but to sleep to digest and recover, thus, the late reply. Klein truly relaxed as he cast his gaze towards the end in a good mood. In regards to the spirit world plunderers, Azek's description was: it's a rather scheming and rare creature. They are very good at disguises, making it very difficult to find them. One thing to make use of is their strong aggressiveness. However, they're also very dangerous. Even with a strength that is close to sequence 4, one needs to be sufficiently careful, otherwise, one can accidentally end up as its sole avatar. Its exact characteristic is: I'm not sure nor am I able to recall where spirit world plunderers are most active. I suggest you pray to Moria. He is very friendly to humans and will be willing to answer similar questions while wielding authority in such matters. The ritual's key is the correct honorific name and symbol. Once you have the clues to a spirit world plunderer, you can wait a while. I might be able to provide you some help. How can I bother you? Klein raised his right hand and pinched the two ends of his mouth. He then flipped the page and read the final page. Likewise, I will help you seal that glove once again. It's not that I do not wish to teach you the way to seal it, but it's unlikely that you can do it. This requires the power of the underworld, requiring, at the very least, an undying to do it. Alright. I should quickly have some free time. I recall you mentioning about Death's Ring. Mr. Azek's changes don't seem too significant. At least I can't tell from the letter. Klein slowly exhaled as he flicked his wrist and ignited the paper in his hand, turning it to ashes before it floated into the trash can that was welded to the floor. Although he didn't receive the whereabouts of spirit world plunderers from Azek, he could also determine that this descendant of death similarly didn't remember Calderon City. He also guessed that this mysterious spirit world city likely had nothing to do with the underworld, otherwise, Mr. Azek, who had already restored connections with the underworld, should have recalled something about it. Even so, Klein still planned on replying to ask more about Calderon City. Regardless, one should always have hope. Also, I should inform Mr. Azek that I'm in the southern continent. Klein seriously considered the contents of his reply. However, he didn't immediately write it, afraid that the act of summoning the messenger would be noticed via the spiritual perception of the other Beyonders on board the airship. As he turned his gaze, Klein looked out the window once again. It was dark and silent. Looking at the dark sky with the concealed crimson moon, Admiral of Stars Katlia retracted her gaze, picked up her pen, and deliberated over her words. The answer is neither. She was originally somewhat perplexed as to why Queen Mystic hadn't directly asked what home was. Instead, she had attached two guesses. This made it easy for the question to receive an ineffective answer. But on second thought, she believed that Queen Mystic had thought it through in a way far better than she could have. This was because this question was posed to a secret existence that was suspected to be an ancient god. As the number of diary pages she could provide had numbered about 20, with each attempt giving her an answer, therefore, just 3 pages, even if they were of high value, made it difficult to be equivalent in value to a key question of where Emperor Roselle's mental and spiritual home was. The secrets concealed within might even be more important than a single card of blasphemy. And Her Majesty's question seems stubborn. She doesn't seem willing to switch to something else, therefore, she specially added 2 choices, hoping that she could obtain an answer via elimination or directly obtain confirmation. In contrast, this lowers the value of the question. It then abides by the principle of equivalent exchange. As Katlia thought, she recalled something. Back then, she was still young and was being educated on all kinds of information. Queen Mystic would test her and tell her that in regards to answering a question, there were 3 opportunities for reducing the difficulty. First, was to eliminate a wrong option. Second, was to request the help of some specific person on the ship. 3, was to pray to one of the 7 lights to receive the answer. Of course, the prerequisite to doing that was to complete the ritual herself. Clearly, Queen Mystic had chosen to use the first method to reduce the difficulty. Did Her Majesty have such an experience when she was little? After eliminating the 2 wrong options, I wonder how close she is to the real answer. Katlia's expression unnaturally softened as she wrote. According to the intelligence I've gathered, there's a storm brewing in Backland. I wish you well. She didn't directly mention the deputy director of MI9 or the royal family's consultant. After all, they were news shared between the Tarot Club. It wasn't something she had asked herself and tacitly acquiesced by Mr. Fool to inform Queen Mystic directly. Folding the letter, Catlia summoned Queen Mystic Bernadette's messenger. Baron's Harbor. It was twilight. Danitz and Anderson found a hotel opened by an Intis immigrant, finally experiencing the convenience of not having any language barriers. After putting down their luggage, Danitz immediately headed towards the staircase wearing a cloak and his boxing glove. Anderson leaned against the opposite door and asked in amusement, "Is there anything else?" Danitz immediately gave a sarcastic chortle. "I'm heading out to buy a dictionary. This is way more reliable than your body language. In a few days, I might even be fluent in a few common words." Anderson stroked his chin with his left black-gloved hand. "Your boxing glove was created from that giant's remains, right? What are its negative effects?" Danitz blurted out, being rash, often acting before thinking. As he spoke, he fell silent. To buy a dictionary late at night, in a city that's somewhat chaotic. Furthermore, I obviously look like someone from Intis. That really is rather dangerous. No, I can't keep wearing this glove. Danitz was stunned for a few seconds before he raised his hand and attempted to take off his boxing glove. When he was halfway done, he suddenly paused and sized up Anderson. When he saw him wearing a black glove on his left hand, he did a hollow chuckle and wore his glove again. "I believe that in the southern continent, a place like this requires strength," Danitz added with a faint smile. Anderson's expression remained the same as he continued stroking his chin. "Then, what do you plan on doing?" Danitz pointed at the staircase and said, "I plan on finding the hotel's boss and borrow his dictionary. I believe he will be teaching his children Dutanese. That's an idea worth pursuing. But even with a dictionary, you won't be able to master it anytime soon. Even if you grasp a few terms, it will still be rather difficult. After all, the language here is a completely different system from the northern continent," Anderson said with a TSK. "Why don't I suggest a solution for you? Your captain has likely taught you some ritualistic magic in the God of Knowledge and Wisdom domain, right?" "Yes," Danitz replied with a nod without a second thought. Anderson clapped his hands and said. Danitz shook his head without hesitation. "I believe in the Lord of Storms, and not the God of Knowledge and Wisdom." The reason why some of the ritualistic magic cast in the past had received a reply was because of Captain. Upon saying that, he shot Anderson a glance. "Weren't you born in Seeker, growing up in Lenberg, being classmates with Captain? Then you should also be a believer of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Wouldn't it be more effective if you held the ritual?" Anderson shook his head and laughed. Despite being believers all the same, those who can actually receive a reply are in the extreme minority. Seemingly in thought, he said, "The best method is to find a priest or bishop from the Church of Knowledge. Get them to make some charms. I recall that there are a few pilgrims from Lenberg here in Baron's Harbor. Why don't we visit them tomorrow?" Danitz was just about to say yes when he suddenly revealed a look of suspicion. "I have this nagging feeling that you are up to something." Anderson's expression immediately froze. On the airship, Klein had his seatbelt buckled and had a blanket over him as he leaned against his seat, already in deep sleep. At this moment, it was dark outside. There was little light from the lands, and the scenery swept across slowly despite moving at a high speed. Everything appeared peaceful and silent. After an unknown period of time, Klein suddenly jolted awake as he stretched his neck. As he kept death knell on him, he had drank plenty of water. His bladder had woken him up. Pulling away his blanket and unbuckling his seatbelt, Klein covered his mouth and yawned. He walked out of the lounge and headed for the washroom at the corner of the hall. After relieving himself, he washed his hand and left the washroom. When he entered the hall, he suddenly saw a figure. The figure was standing amidst the shadows. It was wearing a black robe, and by its eyes were eyeshadow and blush. At a glance, it looked like a shadow or ghost that had floated out of a corpse. Ma'am Daly. Klein obviously recognized her as he immediately reacted as though he jumped in fright. Daly walked a few steps forward and looked up at Dwayne Dantes' face. She paused her gaze in between his eyes as she curled her mouth into a smile. Your eyes and bearing resembles a friend of mine, especially the eyes. Klein immediately feigned enlightenment as he said with a smile, Ma'am, if our genders were swapped, that would be a standard way of hitting on someone. Daly's eyes didn't move away as she chortled. There's no need for any swapping. A difference in genders doesn't change the definition of such actions. If this were any other time, I really would be trying to trick you into a bed if I had said something like that, even tricking you all the way down the aisle. However, I have no such thoughts at the moment. I came over because your eyes really remind me of him. It's really quite overwhelming speaking with Ma'am Daly. I can't let her lead the conversation, otherwise, she might realize that Dwayne Dantes isn't the Casanova that has a wide preference or a romance expert. Instead, he's nothing but an inexperienced man in front of charming women. I have to take the lead in this conversation. Klein's mind stirred as he directly asked in a half-joking manner, Ma'am, do you like that friend of yours? Daly was taken aback for a second before she pricked her brows, lowered her head, and smiled. That's not something that needs hiding. If only he could be like you, being willing to take the initiative when facing a woman, proficient at creating a suggestive atmosphere. Perhaps if that were the case, we might already have children. Unfortunately, he's a conservative man. When he chats with me, all he spoke of was matters regarding work or his experiences. Any hints given to him or any joke that went overboard just made him appear uncomfortable. He often found excuses to leave. He looked old, and he didn't look after his hair. He also had a bad memory. He even forgot my birthday. Whenever I thought of him, I got mad, having the urge to push him down into bed, tying his arms to the bed's railing. Klein looked at Daly's head with a gloomy gaze as he sighed to interrupt her. Ma'am, you said too much. Daly looked up, speaking with a smile in no way different than before. I thought you would enjoy talking about matters about this at a deeper level. Klein let out a soft chuckle. Then why didn't you turn those thoughts into action? I can tell that you aren't just a woman who can only talk. Daly scoffed. Guess. Following that, she nodded. Thank you for not saying that I've been harassing you. As she spoke, she turned around and headed for the extensive lounge where the red gloves were. The corners of Klein's mouth curled up slightly as he returned to his room, shaking his head. When she came to the entrance of the extensive lounge, Daly, whose eyes landed on the floorboards, suddenly saw an untied shoelace. She shifted her gaze up as her eyes reflected the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell. Leonard glanced at Dwayne Dantes as he entered his lounge and said with a suppressed voice, he has plenty of secrets. He's not a simple person. Daly chuckled and nodded. I know. Having said that, she briskly walked past Leonard Mitchell and walked into the extensive lounge. When she covered a few meters, she slowed down her pace and once again lowered her head. Leonard remained standing at the door, watching the long dragged-out shadows that were cast from the lights outside. Slowly and silently, he exhaled. Inside the small lounge, Klein stood by the door, raising his right hand and rubbing his temples. He stood there like a statue. In the Berg household in the city of Silver, Derek sat on a stool, munching on bread that was made from black-faced grass powder as he seriously listed down the matters that he had yet to complete in recent times. I haven't obtained the information of the bizarro Bane that Mr. World needs. I still lack the points required for the Sequence 5 Vampire Beyonder characteristic. I only have 3 friends. That's not enough. All the clues I have regarding the former chief's mausoleum aren't much. As the thoughts flashed through his mind, Derek filled his stomach and took off his shirt. Holding an open container that had been ground from stone, he used the sticky black liquid inside to smear on the obvious bruises on his body. Although the city of Silver only had edible black-faced grass in its vicinity, it didn't only have one type of plant. There were many kinds of plants, all of them being strange. By using different powers, they could grow and proliferate in the dark, sun-lacking environment that only had lightning. One of the traditions of the City of Silver was to select different plants and mix them with organs of monsters to create various kinds of ointments. They were especially effective when treating most injuries and illnesses. It prevented the residents from dying just because of a trivial problem. They were simplified versions of the magical medicine, holy ointment, and essential oil formulas that generations of demon hunters obtained from their potions. These low-level products thus became a tradition. Just after Derek applied the ointment and took a whiff of the pungent smell before putting on his clothes, he suddenly heard knocking at the door. His mind tensed up instinctively as he held up Thunder God's roar, the dark blue hammer that had electric sparks swirling around it. He carefully approached the door, prepared to kill any monsters that suddenly emerged from the darkness. "Who is it?" Derek asked in a deep voice. A gruff voice sounded from the outside. "Baylor." At the same time, bright light beamed its way through the door cracks and windows. That was the power of a Dawn Paladin. Derek relaxed as he opened the door and greeted, "Baylor, aren't you leading a patrol team today?" Baylor stood 2.2 meters tall and was recently befriended by Derek. Derek was also most impressed with him because Baylor was able to rein in his powers to a great extent and was a person who took very good care of his companions. In addition, his patrol team's recent patrol area included the former chief's mausoleum. Baylor had brownish-yellow hair that resembled Derek's and a thick beard. His favorite pastime was fighting with others. Upon hearing that, he said with a smile, "The 6-member council has just ordered our team to skip the area of the former chief's mausoleum. And this area is the last spot for our patrol mission. Let's go to the training field. Let's get some exercise." The 6-member council has specially ordered the patrolling teams to skip that area? They plan to open the former chief's entrance today? I wonder what will happen. I hope there's no sinister plot on Elder Lovia's side. Derek was alarmed as he hurriedly built connections, but he was at a loss. Just as he hesitantly wore his clothes in preparation to join Baylor at the training field, a shadow grew out from the dark ends of the street and said, "Derek Berg, the chief has requested you visit him at the spire." At the top of the spire, in the room that belonged to the chief. Colin Iliad had the tall body that was standard of the City of Silver. His hair was grizzled, unkempt, and rather disheveled. He had deep wrinkles around his cheeks, but there were no wrinkles elsewhere. Some old scars, that were either deep or twisted, remained on his cheeks. He wore a linen shirt on the inside with a brown coat draped over his body. By his waist was a belt filled with tiny compartments. His light blue eyes were deep, filled with the experiences and stories they had seen. After Derek bowed, the demon hunter nodded gently and pointed diagonally to the items placed on the table. "Do you still remember them?" Derek took a glance as his gaze suddenly froze. His eyes reflected 2 translucent worms that had the thickness of a child's finger. Worm of time. They were translucent worms of time with rings. They were worms of time that came from Blasphemer Amon's avatar. Yes. Derek fell silent for a second before instinctively answering, "They were left behind by Amon." Colin Iliad nodded indiscernibly and said, "One of them was even coughed out by you." Without waiting for Derek to say a word, he continued in a thorough manner, "You once said that while being possessed by Amon, you were in a daze most of the time, as though you were in a dream. You were occasionally lucid." Faced with the chief's gaze, Derek nodded, indicating that he had given such a description before. Colin Iliad moved his gaze away and cast it out the window, looking down at the nearby buildings. "I believe I haven't told you the things you did during those times. You did a total of 2 rituals. One of them had elements of a secret deed, and the other one was like a sacrifice. You obtained a certain reply. Do you have any recollection of such things?" "Indeed, I was being monitored when I sought Mr. Fool's help and used the secret deed ritual to cleanse Amon's avatar." Derek wasn't surprised by what the chief was mentioning. He had long been advised by the Hanged Man that, based on the rich experience the City of Silver elders, it was impossible that they would dismiss someone acting abnormally. Thus, the conclusion that he had been constantly monitored after he left the dungeon was obtained. This was corroborated by the fact that someone had emerged from the shadows when doing the sacrificial ritual. I don't have any recollections. Derek pretended to be in thought before he shook his head. Colin, who was observing him through the corner of his eye, turned his head over and said with a sigh, "Try recalling it carefully. These 2 worms left behind by Amon are materials of great value. I've been trying to find ways of using them. If I can secretly make them into items, this might be a trump card that no one else knows. It can play a crucial role at critical moments. During the 2 rituals you experienced, you might have symbols, ancient incantations, or mysterious elements that can be used for reference. Think about it carefully." If this were in the past, Derek would have only understood the chief superficially, but at this moment, he was able to interpret the hidden and indirect meaning behind the sentence, albeit being a few seconds slow. "I know there's still a certain connection between you and Amon. We will be opening the mausoleum to the former city of Silver Chief. I need to prepare additional trump cards against any unexpected accidents or cause that Lovia and company to use to inflict any harm to the city of Silver. Try attempting communication." Mr. Hanged Man was right. The higher one's level is, the more experienced they are at handling danger, and the more accustomed they will be at expressing themselves by speaking in riddles. It's a way to leave options open for both parties. Derek suddenly felt he had grasped a particular technique. Upon realizing that the chief's goal was to limit Elder Lovia and how she represented the fallen creator, he felt that he needed to do something. However, he had 0 clue on how to use a worm of time. All he could do was consider praying to Mr. Fool and see if he could provide any help. "I'll try my best to recall. I need a silent room." As Derek spoke, he paused, deliberating over his words. Colin Iliad was apparently prepared as he pointed towards the corridor. Many of the rooms across the corridor do not have people in them. "Choose one yourself." "Yes, Your Excellency." Derek bowed and exited the room before entering an unused room. He locked the wooden door, sat down, and in the dark corner, prayed softly as his eyes emitted a soft glow. Desi Bay, Eskelson Harbor. Klein left the airship from the gangway with his suitcase in hand, prepared to head into the city on a carriage prepared by the military base. As for Daly Simone, Leonard Mitchell, and the other Red Gloves, they were the first batch to leave the airship. Klein had been arranged to be one of the last, hence, they didn't meet each other. After entering the city and finding a hotel to stay in, he prepared to have some rest to remedy the poor sleep he had last night. Suddenly, he heard a series of illusory, stacked pleas. "Sounds like Little Son." Klein yawned while covering his mouth and entered a cramped washroom. With great difficulty, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and arrived above the gray fog. As he expected, the crimson star that was blinking and burgeoning was none other than the one that represented the sun. He emanated his spirituality to make contact with it, and he quickly learned what the sun's prayer was pertaining to. The city of Silver Chief is asking Little Son, no, asking what he thinks to be Amon on how to use a worm of time charm. Thankfully, I had such a question previously and have already gotten an answer. However, using the worm of time to create a potent charm that can temporarily exchange fates will require him to pray to the Fool. Wouldn't this directly expose the fact that the one backing Little Son is not Amon, but some unknown hidden existence? Klein tapped the edge of the modeled table as he seriously considered how he was to answer. In less than a minute, he quickly reframed his line of thought and discovered that his worries were meaningless. Firstly, apart from Shepherd Elder Lovia, who can receive certain revelations from the true Creator, no one in the City of Silver knows Amon. All they might guess is that he is likely the Angel of Time, one of the 8 kings of angels that were by the Creator's side. Therefore, even if they learn of an existence called the Fool, they will probably believe that it's Amon's true body, or a deity that Amon now believes in. Secondly, the honorific name of the Fool is no longer a secret to the true Creator, Blasphemer Amon, and Shepherd Elder Lovia. It doesn't matter if more people from the City of Silver learns of it. Thirdly, the chief named Colin Iliad is only a demon hunter. Even if he knows the honorific name of the Fool and has a grade 0 sealed artifact, there's nothing he can do. After all, Blasphemer Amon and the true Creator haven't been knocking at my door in the middle of the night. Finally, the 6-member council's chief is long aware of a problem with Little Sunday. He just hasn't made it obvious. As his thoughts raced, he felt that he needed to be bolder. Perhaps I can use this opportunity to develop another 1 or 2 downlines, no, I mean believers. Little Sun won't have to fight alone anymore in the future. Besides, I've already improved since the time when I wiped away Amon's avatar. I've also accumulated even deeper knowledge in mysticism. I wield the sea god scepter and can stir even more of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. I don't have to worry about missing anything when facing a sequence 4 demigod during the ritual, as long as I don't rashly pull him above the gray fog. Klein quickly made up his mind. And cast the method to creating a fate siphon charm into the crimson star representing the sun. Knock. 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 The sound of knocking resonated within the chief's room at the top of the spire. And before the knocking even sounded, Colin Iliad had already known that Derek Berg had opened the door and was walking over to his room. Come on in. He turned his body and faced the door. Derek pushed open the door and entered. Bowing, he said, "Your Excellency, I've recalled some vague details." Colin Iliad nodded with a calm expression. What are they? Use pure silver and mercury as materials. Derek succinctly described the beginning of the ritual and paused. I think I muttered an honorific name back then, the fool that doesn't belong to this era. Colin narrowed his eyes and immediately cut him off. The corresponding symbols are the ones left on the candle? Yes, Derek frankly replied. The second line is, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog. At this moment, Colin cut him off once again. Is there no need for other ritual materials? No, Derek nodded, feeling slightly puzzled. Only then did he realize that the chief was apparently deliberately stopping him from reciting Mr. Fool's honorific name. Yes, our common language is Jotun. It's a language that can stir the powers of nature. If I were to directly say out the honorific name, it would result in all kinds of unknown effects. I know that Mr. Fool is a true deity and trustworthy, so I was reciting it all out habitually. However, the chief doesn't know that. Derek continued, feeling somewhat enlightened. Third line, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Colin silently listened in silence before nodding. Very good. Although I cannot be sure that the content you recall is of any use, it's still a sizable contribution. I'll get someone to add to your contribution. Return, or go to the library to read some books for a while. Yes, Your Excellency. Derek wore a deadpan look as he silently heaved a sigh of relief and rapidly retreated to the room at the top of the spire. Colin Iliad watched him leave before heading behind his desk and sitting down. He cast his gaze on the 2 translucent ringed worms in front of him. Beside the worms was a notebook. Drawn on it was a secret symbol comprised of half a pupilless eye and half contorted lines. Colin's gaze remained fixed for a while, as though he had been petrified. After a while, he slowly stood up and took out 3 candles. After setting up the candles, Colin Iliad found a piece of pure silver and picked up a carving knife beside it. With steady strokes, he carved out a palm-sized charm vessel. Then, he followed Derek Berg's description, drawing the secret symbol of the fool on both sides of the silver piece. The entire process was completed quickly. If an observer was watching, they wouldn't have been able to discern his actions. Yet, the final product didn't show any flaws. It looked like a piece of art that had been slowly carved out. Right on the heels of that, Colin Iliad found another bottle of mercury. Directly using his powerful spirituality, he guided the liquid inside to trickle into the charm and fill all the patterns. He prevented the mercury on the side facing down from dripping due to gravity. Repeating the process, he made a second charm. Colin Iliad placed them in front of the candles and placed a translucent ringed worm on each of them. Compared to him standing up silently, the present Colin's every move was stable, calm, and firm. He didn't show any signs of hesitation, just like how he faced powerful monsters that came out of the darkness. After finishing the ritual, he took 2 steps back and removed the crossed swords that were hanging from the wall. He stabbed them into the crevices of the floor tiles at the door. He then closed his eyes and muttered. Pure and thick beams of light emerged out of the void as they enveloped the two swords with a holy and glorious feeling. The light beams increased in quantity, slowly transforming into liquid water that flowed across the cracks in the floor tiles and the walls, forming a cage that isolated him from the outside. As a senior demon hunter, Colin Iliad didn't wish to take such precautionary measures when holding a ritual. This was because there was a tiny chance of angering the target, bringing about dangerous developments. However, he had no choice but to do so because he needed to be certain that even if the ritual failed, even if the fool was an existence filled with malice, and even if he were to die at the altar, he would not bring too much harm to the City of Silver. In regards to the defensive power of the cage, Colin was rather confident because this directly stemmed from a godlike sealed artifact, a crown which the giant King Ormur wore, proof of glory. This was one of the main reasons why the City of Silver could survive wave after wave of monster assaults in the Dark Ages. With all his preparations completed, solely using his spirituality, Colin Iliad used his desk as an altar and created a sacred and clean environment that no one could disturb. He then lit the 3 candles. The pale yellow light flickered as they reflected in his eyes. He bowed his head and scattered the plant powder, monster hide, and fur into the candle flame or lit them and threw them into a cauldron so as to please the secret existence he was about to pray to. Such acts weren't rare in the City of Silver. Known to all, there were rituals held that targeted the creator, but from time to time, certain residents would be enticed by unknown existences during their patrols or exploration, tempted to hold all kinds of rituals. Most of the latter was a passive act, but there were a few that were done proactively. On the one hand, the cumulative despair of not receiving any response from the creator had made them eager to grab onto any other existence to rely on, and on the other hand, many generations of the 6-member council had come to a common consensus that the creator who had abandoned the land might very well not return again. Seeking out other alternatives was something that had to be expedited, but unfortunately, such attempts only led to nothing or death, nothing else. And it was because of this reason that regardless of the difficulties faced or how many times they discovered cities that were destroyed because of evil gods, the City of Silver continued their exploration of regions that were further away. As for Colin Iliad himself, the discovery of the outsider, Jack, brought him an indescribable sense of surprise and hope. The encounters when they explored Afternoon Town and the prophecies of the Kings of Angels' ploy and the ecclesiastic had made him feel a more pressing sense of urgency. He no longer held hope for the creator's return. With the 2 reasons combined, along with Lovia's and Derek's abnormality, as well as the prophecy of the apocalypse, as chief of the 6-member council, senior demigod and powerful demon hunter, Colin Iliad had no choice but to attempt to dance on the edge of a knife. He had no choice but to consider making a transaction with a hidden existence. Silently exhaling, Colin took a step back and chanted with a weather-worn tone, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the grey fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. I pray to you, praying for the strength that stems from mystery, and praying for the bestowment that stems from good luck. I implore you to make these items on this altar turn into charms." Just as Colin spoke with a cadence of mystery, he saw the altar in front of him immediately turn dark. It was as though an indescribable godhood was emanating from the candle in the middle. The candle's flame instantly burgeoned, but it failed to light the surroundings. Instead, it made everything turn illusory, making countless shapes produce seemingly non-existent transparent shadows as they covered every inch. High above this illusory world and countless figures, there were 7 lustrous brilliances of different colors spiraling. They seemed to possess immense knowledge. And above these 7 lustrous brilliances, there was an endless grayish-white fog, and sitting above was an ancient palace that looked down upon everything. Demon Hunter Colin temporarily forgot everything else as he stared intently at the scene above the altar. It was as though something that only existed in books or ancient tomes had taken a step through the illusory and entered reality, appearing before him. If he recalled correctly, this was likely the projection of the spirit world. Before the disaster, before the time the Creator abandoned this land, it was easy to observe and enter the spirit world. The spirit world now only existed in the City of Silver's textbooks and various records, but no one could touch it. At this moment, a creaking, illusory sound sounded. The ancient palace that overlooked the gray fog and spirit world seemed to open its doors. Right on the heels of that, Colin saw the unformed charms in front of the candle produce a grayish luster. Their patterns were then lit up, as they intercrossed with each other, suddenly bursting into a blinding radiance, enveloping the pure silver foils and the ringed worms. The dark world above the entire altar also instantly warped. Everything was quickly restored to normal as two strange black crystalline charms appeared on the altar. They were like a pair of eyes of some existence that silently observed the world. Demon Hunter Colin was taken aback as he retracted his gaze and bowed his head. With a deep voice, he said, "Thank you for your blessings. Praise you." He didn't delay as he immediately ended the ritual and removed the seal. After doing all of this, City of Silver chief of the 6-member council returned to the desk and picked up the 2 charms made from the 2 Amon avatar remnants. At this moment, his mind was still fixated on the scene he had previously seen. Based on his knowledge and mysticism, those that were situated high in the spirit world were mentioned to be the 7 lights in ancient tomes. They were believed to be close to that of deities, but none of the records indicated what was above the 7 lights or what the gray fog represented. They didn't indicate what the ancient palace which was enveloped by the gray fog while overlooking the entire spirit world represented. And during the entire ritual, Colin Iliad only felt that the fool he was praying to was staid, mysterious, and almighty, nothing like the evil beings who often liked to express their powers as though eager to showcase something. Such a performance had a close parallel in the records of the City of Silver, the creator. As he looked at the charms in hand and his condition, the grizzled demon hunter Colin suddenly closed his eyes as figures flashed past his mind for some reason. They were his father, mother, elder brother, younger sister, oldest son, youngest son, daughter, and oldest grandson whose lives he had personally ended. This already old chief remained silent for a very long time before he suddenly sighed softly. It's been 2,583 years. After 2,583 years, the City of Silver had finally received a normal response. In the library in the steeple, Derek was in the ancient myths section. He often browsed when he saw a notebook he had never seen before. This notebook's cover was made from a particular monster's hide. There were clear patterns on it, and the pages inside were old and yellowed. The records included the experiences of the original author when he encountered different monsters. These monsters were mostly accessible among the City of Silver's textbooks. Even their special traits were the same. However, the thoughts and experiences from the numerous battles left Derek reading in relish as he read seriously. As he flipped through it, he suddenly noticed a monster named Shapeshifter. Such monsters didn't come equipped with the intelligence to communicate, but they were adept at setting up traps to deal with targets. Furthermore, they could disguise as others, using what seemed like fascinating methods to complete a hunt. The notebook's owner had commented on them as being bizarre and dangerous. This is very similar to Mr. World's guess of the Bizarrobane's traits. Could Shapeshifter be the Bizarrobane? Derek felt delighted as he quickly read the rest of the entry. He discovered that this type of monster lived towards the north, in a faraway city's ruins. And the monsters in that area's darkness were powerful and terrifying. Even the 6-member council wasn't able to deal with some of them, therefore, after 2 attempts, the City of Silver paused any exploration of the area. To date, exploration of the area hadn't been resumed. Due to such reasons, the City of Silver's textbooks didn't make mention of the unique monsters there. After reading the record, Derek subconsciously flipped the notebook to the last page, wishing to know who had experienced the 2 harrowing explorations. As he flipped through it, he saw a name, Colin Iliad. Desi County, Eskelson Harbor. Klein returned to the real world, rubbed his temples, and collapsed into bed. To give the City of Silver's chief a better impression of the fool and generate more trust, he had proactively added some special effects when responding, expressing the might of the mysterious space above the gray fog during the secret deed ritual and sacrificial and bestowment ritual. This expended quite a sizable amount of his spirituality, exhausting him. I'll find food for creeping hunger when I wake up. I'll let it have a good nap above the gray fog. Klein thought in his stupor and soon fell asleep. He was woken up by his rumbling tummy after sleeping from morning to the afternoon. The ingredients used for Desi's pies are much more generous than in Backland. However, they prefer adding some local spices. It felt a little odd when taking the first few bites, but after getting used to it, it's quite a different style. Klein sat inside his hotel and swapped between taking a mouthful of the oily pie and drinking a mouthful of cool, refreshing sweet iced tea. He was living quite an idyllic life. After he had his fill, he didn't immediately pack up. He picked up the top hat on the chair beside him and wore it. Meanwhile, his left palm suddenly turned transparent as his entire body faded away. Klein had entered the spirit world and was planning on traveling to the Pato harbor in the Berserk Sea. He was there to seek out food for creeping hunger. Eskelson, where he was, did belong to Desi Bay, but it was nowhere along the coast since it was an island. This was the southernmost island of Desi Bay, and going past it meant one's entry into the Berserk Sea. Therefore, the second Klein headed for the predetermined coordinates, an abnormal sight appeared before his eyes. The spirit world's air flows seemed to be materialized as they spun into a wind. They howled as they enveloped a huge region that seemed boundless. It was dim inside, with layers of dark clouds. Bolts of lightning tainted with the deep gloom kept flashing, illuminating the surrounding area like it was the apocalypse. At that moment, Klein felt as though he had arrived in a sea that was eternally ravaged by storms. However, he knew with certainty that this was the spirit world. Indeed, it's just like what many books on mysticism mention. The power involved with the perishing of death has not only changed the atmospheric weather of the sea between the northern continent and southern continent, but it also filled it with disaster and danger. It's how its name was derived. Furthermore, it also broke the barrier between reality and the illusory, tainting and damaging the corresponding spirit world and causing them to affect one another. In the Berserk Sea, if one holds a ritual that involves the spirit world, using powers related to the spirit world, there will be a high probability of an accident occurring, causing unimaginable developments. Klein reflected poignantly as he used his eyes to verify what the books wrote. From his point of view, if it weren't because of this, the various countries in the northern continent wouldn't have waited for Emperor Roselle to find the safe sea route before they had a chance of invading the southern continent. After all, to most high-sequence beyonders, they could easily traverse normal kinds of natural barriers. Roselle's safe sea route wasn't simply geological in nature, but also mysticism in nature. This also meant that since the Berserk Sea and spirit world were influencing each other and overlapped, Klein could directly use the local sea maps to traverse the spirit world's calamities. Recalling the content he had read before, Klein found the correct location and entered the dark spirit world. The howling of the gales sounded from every direction. Even the secondary gusts of wind left a chill running deep down from Klein's soul or spine. This made him believe that if he had traveled in a spirit body state without the use of the Black Emperor card, Tyrant card, and Azek's copper whistle to augment himself, there was quite a good chance of him suffering a serious injury. And if this wasn't the safe sea route, he believed that there was a chance his physical body couldn't withstand the black storms that were filled with death. Compared to the gales, the dark lightning bolts were far more dangerous. Klein suspected that he couldn't even withstand being smote by one of them. As for the hidden maelstrom and the wandering creatures, they were another form of danger. This is a place without any material seawater. I wonder what's at the end of the maelstrom. Klein followed the safe sea route and traversed the land at an adequate speed. From time to time, he would survey his surroundings to broaden his horizons. Suddenly, he saw a strange creature. It was dragging a huge sickle and was situated inside a black hurricane. As it was formed by individual skulls, it was swollen and massive. The skulls were either grayish-white or grayish-black of varying sizes. They were also from different species, and all of them were stacked into one, forming its torso, limbs, and head. Almost at the same moment that Klein saw this strange creature, it also discovered Klein. All the skulls turned their heads in unison, producing a grinding sound that couldn't be concealed. The dark eye sockets were countless in number as they followed and overlapped one another. Klein's forehead throbbed as he used traveling to pass through the area, entering the next safe sea route. And on the nearby illusory sea, bloody arms and illusory greenish-black tentacles extended out from the sea surface. Outside the City of Silver, a black mausoleum stood inverted over the ground like an inverted pyramid. At that moment, there were all kinds of dense black plants that grew out from the cracks in the mausoleum's bricks. Even the heavy door by the entrance was covered with them. Colin Iliad had 2 swords slung across his back as he stood with 2 other elders of the 6-member council. They were observing the passage that diagonally led them deep underground. Lovia with her silver, curly hair watched silently for a moment before saying, "It should be possible already." Unlike how she usually switched randomly between 2 mental states, this shepherd elder was now stayed and calm. She didn't show any signs of abnormalities as her pale gray eyes were deep and placid. Colin gently nodded and took out a bottle of medicine from 2 different compartments on his belt. Unscrewing the lids, he downed them. His light blue eyes rapidly brightened. His unwrinkled skin had blood vessels protrude as they got tinted with silver. Right on the heels of that, the chief drew a sword and smeared a silver-gray ointment across its surface. As he took steps to prepare, another 6-member council elder, Wait Chermont, did something similar. This bald man who had a tattooed symbol on his head stood nearly 2.5 meters tall. He didn't look a day over 45. But in fact, he was nearly 80. He was also a Sequence 4 demon hunter, a demigod that was one of the main pillars of support for the City of Silver. In the City of Silver, due to the lack of main ingredients, and with the citizens being aware of the acting method and having sufficient combat experience, they advanced from low to mid sequences rather easily. Sequence 6 Beyonders were the majority, but from Sequence 5 onwards, due to the rituals required and other reasons, the number of Beyonders drastically fell. At Sequence 4 where there was a qualitative change, an entire generation might not even produce one. Wait Chermont didn't dual wield like an orthodox demon hunter. This allowed him to use different ointments to produce different effects so as to handle more complicated situations. He wielded an iron-gray hammer, and on his back was a huge bow that was equally as massive as his body. He was like a miniaturized giant that walked out of an oil painting. The bow was a mystical item, one that didn't have overly severe side effects. In the historical records of the City of Silver, it received its name from killing a dragon at the demigod level. Its name was Dragon-Slaying Bow. After finishing their preparations, Wait slammed his hammer in front of him loudly, drew his bow, and slowly pulled it back. Sizzling bolts of lightning suddenly emerged as they condensed into one, and as it grew longer from the pull, it formed a blinding and radiant arrow between the bowstring and the back of the bow. Just as Wait's fingers released the bowstring, the lightning arrow shot straight to the mausoleum's door, which was overrun with human hair like weeds. Silently, the heavy door appeared to have long rotten. It exploded into pieces along with the electric bolt's explosion, revealing a deep passageway. This passageway shimmered with pale white lights. It extended far beyond what one's eyes could see, giving off a creepy and cold feeling. Colin's eyes suddenly flashed with 2 complex, dark green symbols, and he reflected the mausoleum's entrance in them. A few seconds later, he held his sword diagonally and walked into the mausoleum. Wait slung his dragon-slaying bow, picked up his hammer, and followed closely behind. The purple-robed Lovia's expression remained the same as she followed through the shattered door at a decent pace with her hands empty. As they descended via sections of passageways and staircases, the 3 members of the 6-member council didn't show any unrest or anxiety in the completely silent environment. They allowed their footsteps to echo in their surroundings. After descending 1 level, they suddenly saw a river before them. It was an illusory and jet-black river. Under the river's surface were blood-colored arms that had been skinned. Green baby-faced veins and slippery tentacles with eyes were densely entwined together. They kept flailing upwards in a bid to grab whatever passed them. The river was close to the side of the entrance. There were figures of different heights wearing old clothes with their backs facing the 3 elders. They kept walking back and forth as though they were vexed over the crossing of the river. Suddenly, one of them sensed the trio approaching them. He slowly turned his body to look at Colin, Wait, and Lovia. It was an elder with his hair being completely white. His forehead and the corners of his mouth were deeply wrinkled. His eyes were light blue and hollow. His expression was numb and blank. Colin Iliad's pupils shrank as he recognized the man. It was his brother, the brother that had been possessed by Amon. He had personally ended his life. At this moment, the other figures turned around, revealing faces that Colin, Waite, and Lovia found extremely familiar. But they were all abnormally numbed faces. Lovia's expression remained unperturbed, but behind her, an illusory knight more than 5 meters tall had appeared at some point in time. This knight wore ancient silver full-body armor. Its eyes were red like blood as they burned akin to flames. After traversing the safe sea route, for about 10 seconds, Klein arrived at the Berserk Sea's Pato harbor. This place deviated from the main sea route and didn't belong to any country. It was a free city for pirates. When his feet hit solid rock, he randomly produced a face, but he wasn't in a rush to enter the port city which had buildings randomly laid out. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an iron cigar case. While passing through the Berserk Sea's spirit world, he had sensed Azek's copper whistle trembling slightly. Removing the wall of spirituality, Klein opened the cigar case and took out the ancient and exquisite copper whistle. This copper whistle had lost its usual coldness and mildness, and it was now burning hot. However, this anomaly was rapidly dissipating. The abnormality associated with the Berserk Sea is suspected to be a result of the perishing of death. Legend has it that this deity's corpse and items are hidden somewhere in these waters, awaiting someone with a special key to open it. This copper whistle came from Mr. Azek, and Mr. Azek is indeed a direct descendant of death, as well as being from the first or second generation. Therefore, this copper whistle had sensed something or had been influenced. Thoughts flashed across Klein's mind as they coalesced today to form a theory. He planned on finding an inn in Pato harbor, head above the gray fog, and use dream divination to attempt to obtain a revelation. Then, he would consider the time and method for returning to Eskelson harbor. It was to prevent himself from encountering any avoidable accidents. And before that, he needed to seek out food for creeping hunger. After walking down the seaside cliff, Klein entered Pato harbor. The buildings here were pretty much built anywhere one desired. There was almost zero planning, causing the roads to be very wide or narrow to the point that it only allowed a single-person passage. In certain areas, one couldn't see the sky when looking up, only to see a swath of clothes that were hung up to dry. Wearing a new face, Klein strolled through such an environment with many pedestrians dressed in pirates' attire. He then habitually headed for the bar to seek out prey. At this moment, he saw several people gathered at a notice board on a square up ahead. What's happening? With his curiosity piqued, Klein approached the area. Using his balance and agility as a clown, he passed through the gaps of the crowd before he barely arrived at a spot where he could see the notice board. On the notice board, there was a piece of paper that was overbearing, covering all the other pieces of paper. It was obvious at a glance. Its title was, The Black Emperor's Crew Recruitment. The Black Emperor? Isn't that the ship of King of the Five Seas, Nast? The one that can traverse the spirit world? Considering how he can be considered the king of pirates, he's actually openly recruiting crew members? Klein was rather surprised as he deliberately spoke out with a suppressed voice. How is that possible? Why not? A stout man beside him with his arm exposed from his rolled-up sleeves laughed out loud. It might be impossible in the past, but it's possible now. Why? Klein was hoping that someone would respond. Immediately, he turned his head and asked. The stout man had tattoos all over his arms and cheeks, making him look fierce. Upon hearing that, he pointed at the main sea route's direction and said, a week ago, the Black Emperor and Lone's highly promoted steam ironclad warship, the Pritz, met and clashed in a sea battle. The Black Emperor had many casualties and are in dire need of more manpower. Ah? Klein's first reaction was that it didn't make mystical sense. Based on the published content in the papers and the rumors he had heard out at sea, he knew that the Pritz was a warship in the normal sense. It lacked any beyonder elements. Perhaps in terms of physical damage, it was stronger than the Black Emperor, but the latter could use the spirit world to leap, just like a large-sized version of a traveler. There was no ordinary armament that could damage it. Furthermore, King of the Five Seas Nast was likely a Sequence 3 demigod of the Black Emperor Paths of the Divine. He was the most infamous powerhouse at sea. He could directly distort the trajectories of cannonballs, making him nearly invincible when facing a fleet that wasn't in any sense mystical. From Klein's point of view, they were enemies at two completely different levels. Yet, the final outcome was not something he could imagine. He didn't hide his astonishment as he blurted, "What about the Pritz?" The fierce-looking man shook his head and replied, "I'm not too sure, but I heard that it wasn't damaged. Only 2 corvettes were sunk." This? Klein was first taken aback before he came to a slight understanding of what happened. He recalled the situation of him robbing the Tuttensis II mummy. The military's demigod had used the law that had the power of mysteriousness weakened and the real strengthened. Once this came into effect, the Black Emperor was just a sailboat that was a little special with some extraordinariness. It definitely couldn't beat an ironclad warship. Neither could it flee. This also meant that the Pritz had a demigod existence on the military's side, or else such a law wouldn't have come into effect. To be able to get the Black Emperor to flee under such a situation, King of the Five Seas Nast must be very, very strong. Below angels, he's definitely one of the strongest. From the looks of it, due to the existence of the Arbiter pathway, the trajectory of this world's military development remains close to that of Earth's. It wouldn't reach a point of not being able to defeat a slightly higher-level mysticism opponent. Klein nodded in enlightenment as he didn't inquire further. As for Beyonders below Sequence 4, in a large-scale battle, apart from the few jobs that could take on the role of outputting offensive firepower or carry out effective defenses, the rest could only avoid a direct clash. They would then be the cleanup crew or simply provide support. For example, a marionettist with all his marionettes feared no one in a mid-sequence Beyonder battle if fighting one-on-one. But once he was on a battlefield with shells hurtling everywhere and machine gunfire sweeping the area, the problem of being physically weak became a problem. Even with paper figurine substitutes, one was unable to escape the range of gunfire, thus, suffering a second round of damage. Under such situations, it might be too late to use paper figurine substitutes again. In such intense battles, the most effective mid-sequence Beyonders are wraiths. They aren't afraid of cannonballs or bullets, nor are they afraid of being discovered by enemies. Furthermore, they have Shriek which can affect a huge area. Klein allowed his thoughts to wander when the man from before continued speaking, "You're also thinking of joining the Black Emperor?" "I'm still not sure," Klein casually replied. The stout man who was covered in tattoos said in excitement, "I have plans on giving it a try anyway. There aren't more than 10 people here who are better at fighting than me here. I have rich experience as a pirate. They'll definitely pick me. However, I won't stay on the Black Emperor for too long. There are too many meaningless rules, such as not being able to plunder or kill defenseless people. Or something as silly as not being able to drag a woman you like unless it's mutual." Did you hear that? Is that anything like a pirate? Although the King of the Five Seas is one of the 4 kings and is publicly acknowledged as the Pirate King, those rules are just like Dog***T. I'm already used to leading a real pirate's life. I like it that way and will not change. I'm only tempted to join because I heard that it's possible for the Black Emperor crew to obtain supernatural powers. When the time comes, I'll leave and form my own pirate crew. As this man spoke excessively, he suddenly realized the stranger's expression turn a little odd. He hesitated for a moment and asked, "Why are you looking at me like that?" The silver-gray glistening sword slashed down suddenly, pinning down a blank-faced figure to the ground. The figure warped and squirmed and gradually dissipated into illusory blobs of light amidst swirling silver light. Colin Iliad retracted his sword and stood straight up. Observing his surroundings, he saw that Waite and Lovia had separately finished their corresponding targets. A region had been cleanly cleared out by the riverside. At this point, above the illusory, eerie black river, a dark boat cruised over. It silently docked by the bank. Upon seeing this scene, Colin slowly exhaled as he muttered with a solemn expression, "Ferryman." He had spent quite a long amount of time with the former chief, and they knew each other rather well. They both knew that the other was troubled by the City of Silver's absence of the Sequence 3 of the Giant Pathway, Silver Night Potion formula. This prevented people from advancing once they reached the level of a demigod. They had thoughts of switching to a neighboring sequence, and this plan had seen the light of hope during a particular expedition. This was because they found the Sequence 3 potion formula of the Phoenix Pathway, Ferryman. From that moment forth, the former chief began building the mausoleum and eventually took up residence inside before sealing the entrance. Observing silently with dark green symbols in his eyes, Colin Iliad said heavily, "Let's cross the river on the boat." Wade and Lovia didn't express any objections, fully trusting the chief's judgment. They followed closely behind him and boarded the dark and strange boat. During this process, the three didn't show any hesitation or observe their surroundings, nor did they pause. It was as though this wasn't an exploration but a visit with a destination in mind. The boat slowly began moving across the ink-black water surface, leaving a long trail in its wake. The bloody arms and the slimy tentacles wildly reached upwards and slammed into the boat, but they failed to leave any marks. They failed to leave any influence. In just over 10 seconds, the three elders of the 6-member council arrived on the other bank of the illusory river. There was an altar there with a heavy, iron-black coffin placed on it. Colin Iliad immediately jumped off the boat and reached out for his other sword. Like before, he appeared cautious, not underestimating anything. Following that, Wade held his iron-gray hammer and landed heavily on the bank. He left the surrounding soil quaking in an obvious manner. He looked at the monster skull that embraced the gigantic coffin, took 2 steps, and placed the hammer in front of him. He then removed the dragon-slaying bow behind him. At this point, Wade suddenly felt the back of his palm itching. He subconsciously looked down and saw that his hair follicles had fine white hair stained with yellowish oil growing from within as they grew in size. Podo Harbor. After Klein fed creeping hunger and found a rowdy inn, he got a room that could barely be considered clean. Then he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the gray fog. Sitting in the fool's chair, Klein first picked up the projection of Azek's copper whistle and conjured a pen and paper before writing a corresponding divination statement. The reason for this copper whistle's abnormality today.